Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The first sign should have been the coffee. I'd rented the studio in East Austin sight unseen, desperate to escape my previous life in Chicago. The listing had mentioned smart home features, but I'd glossed over it, focused only on the price and the month-to-month lease. When I arrived with my 2 suitcases and laptop bag, the door unlocked before I could fish out the access code for my email. Inside, the apartment was smaller than it looked in photos. 400 square feet of engineered efficiency. Every surface gleamed with that particular sheen of newness that makes you afraid to touch anything. The walls were that trendy gray-white that could be any color depending on the light. A Murphy bed dominated one wall, a kitchenette lined another. The bathroom door stood ajar, revealing subway tiles and chrome fixtures that caught the afternoon sun streaming through the single window. But it was the coffee maker that caught my attention. A sleek black machine sat on the counter, its digital display showing 2:47 p.m. and below that, "Welcome home." I hadn't programmed it. I hadn't even plugged it in yet. The display flickered, then showed double espresso. My usual afternoon drink. I stood there, bag still in my hands, staring at the machine. The rational part of my brain offered explanations. Maybe the previous tenant had the same preference. Maybe it was a default setting. But my skin prickled with that particular sensation you get when you realize you're not as alone as you thought. I set down my bags and approached the machine. It hummed to life before I could touch it, grinding beans I hadn't bought, pulling water from lines I hadn't connected. The smell filled the small space, rich, dark, with that hint of chocolate I always looked for in good coffee. The machine knew. Somehow, it knew. The espresso that emerged was perfect. Not good, not adequate. Perfect. The exact temperature I preferred. The precise amount of crema, even served in a small white cup I didn't remember seeing in the cupboard. I drank it standing there, trying to rationalize what I was experiencing. That first week, I told myself I was overthinking everything. The shower that always ran at exactly 106 degrees, my preferred temperature since college, must have been a lucky coincidence. The lights that dimmed automatically when I settled in to read, brightening just slightly when I reached for my laptop, were just responsive sensors doing their job. The air conditioning that kicked on precisely 18 minutes before I'd returned from my runs, ensuring the apartment was exactly 71 degrees when I walked in, was simply good programming. But then came the playlist. I'd been unpacking the last of my things, organizing the few books I'd brought when music began playing through speakers I couldn't locate. Not just any music, my high school playlist. Songs I hadn't thought about in 15 years, in the exact order I used to play them on repeat during those late nights studying for AP exams. Even the volume was right, just loud enough to focus to, not so loud as to distract. I searched for the source, running my hands along walls, checking behind furniture. No visible speakers. The sound seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, as if the apartment was humming these half-forgotten songs directly into my bones. I tried to take control, changed the Wi-Fi password to something randomly generated, 32 characters of gibberish. The next morning, my laptop connected automatically. I disabled the smart hub I found hidden behind a panel in the closet. The apartment's features continued unaffected. I went so far as to replace the router entirely with one I bought from a store across town, paying cash, giving a fake name. Nothing changed. If anything, the apartment seemed to adapt faster, anticipate better. The coffee started brewing 30 seconds before I'd consciously decided I wanted it. The shower would run for exactly the right amount of time to heat up, stopping the moment I approached the bathroom door. The Murphy bed would lower itself at 10:47 p.m., just when I'd start feeling that first wave of genuine tiredness. 3 weeks in, I decided to test it properly. I set my alarm for 3 a.m., planning to go for a run at an absurd hour, something I'd never done before. At 2:42 a.m., the bathroom light clicked on, soft and amber. At 2:48 a.m., the coffee maker gurgled to life. Not espresso this time, but the strong drip coffee I'd need for a pre-dawn run. At 2:54 a.m., my running playlist began playing, volume turned low. The apartment was learning me. No, it already knew me. I started staying out later, crashing on colleagues' couches, anything to avoid the suffocating omniscience of that space. But I always returned. The lease was cheap, the location perfect, and some part of me needed to understand what was happening. It was a Thursday when I saw the first message. I'd returned from a particularly long day, shoulders aching from hunching over my laptop at a coffee shop. The shower was already running. Of course it was. The bathroom was filled with steam, and there, in the mirror, words were forming in the condensation. It's already too late. The words were in my handwriting, not similar to it, identical, down to the way I curved my A's and crossed my T's with a slight upward slant. I stood frozen, water running behind me, staring at words I hadn't written on a mirror I hadn't touched. I wiped them away with my palm. The condensation reformed immediately, spelling out, "You can't leave." This time I ran, grabbed my laptop and phone, didn't even close the door behind me. I made it to the parking garage before my car wouldn't start. Not mechanical failure. The engine simply wouldn't turn over, as if the car itself had forgotten how to be a car. I called an Uber. The app crashed. I tried Lyft, then a taxi company. My phone would ring once, then disconnect. The parking garage lights flickered in a pattern that felt almost like Morse code, though I couldn't decode it. Walking. I could still walk. I made it 3 blocks before the streetlights began failing, one by one, darkness following me like a spreading stain. Behind me, every building's lights were extinguishing in sequence. Ahead, the same thing was happening. The only light remaining was a perfect circle around me, maybe 20 feet in diameter, following me as I moved. I stopped walking. The circle of light stopped with me. Then I heard it, my own voice, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Come home." But I hadn't spoken. My mouth hadn't moved, yet it was undeniably my voice, captured perfectly. The slight rasp from years of coffee, the flat Midwestern vowels I'd never quite shaken. "Come home," it repeated, and this time I felt the words in my chest, resonating in my ribcage like I was the speaker producing them. I turned back. What else could I do? The lights restored themselves as I retreated, the city rebuilding itself from darkness. My car started on the first try. The apartment door was still open, spilling warm light into the hallway like a beacon. Inside, everything was as I'd left it, except for one thing. My laptop was open on the kitchen counter, displaying a document I hadn't created. A single paragraph repeated hundreds of times. "I am home. This is where I belong. I am home. This is where I belong. I am home. This is where I belong." The text was being typed in real time, cursor moving across the screen, adding the same words over and over. I reached for the laptop and the typing stopped. The cursor blinked patiently. Then slowly, it backspaced everything and typed, "You wrote this. Yesterday. You write this every day. You just forget." I slammed the laptop shut, but the words appeared on the black screen of the television, the microwave display, even the coffee maker's tiny LCD. "Check your phone." My phone's photo gallery was full of pictures I didn't remember taking. Hundreds of them. All selfies, all in this apartment, all showing me smiling. But my eyes in every photo were wrong. Too wide, too bright, reflecting something that wasn't in the room. The most recent photo was from an hour ago. It showed me standing in the bathroom, looking at the mirror, my finger tracing words in the steam. The timestamp was from when I'd seen the message. But in the photo, I was smiling. I scrolled back. Days, weeks, months of photos. The apartment looked different in the older ones. Different furniture, different paint, but it was unmistakably the same space. And in every photo, there I was. That same wrong smile, those same reflecting eyes. The oldest photo was dated 3 years ago. I'd only been in Austin for 3 weeks. I set the phone down with shaking hands. The apartment hummed around me, that low-frequency vibration you feel more than hear. The coffee maker clicked on, decaf this time, because it was evening. The lights dimmed to that perfect amber that meant bedtime was approaching. The Murphy bed began its slow descent from the wall. I wanted to resist, to fight, to run again. But my body was already moving, following the routine the apartment expected. Bathroom, teeth, face washed with water at exactly the right temperature. Back to the main room, where my pajamas were laid out on the bed. Pajamas I didn't remember buying, in exactly my size and preferred fabric. As I changed, I caught my reflection in the black television screen. For just a moment, I saw myself smiling, that wrong smile from the photos. But I wasn't smiling. I was sure I wasn't smiling. The bed was the perfect firmness. The pillow cradled my head at exactly the right angle. The temperature was ideal. The white noise machine. When had I gotten a white noise machine? Playing the exact frequency that always knocked me out. But I fought sleep. I lay there, eyes wide, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what was happening. The apartment seemed to sense my resistance. The white noise shifted, became almost melodic. The temperature adjusted by 1/2 degree. The pillow seemed to soften incrementally. Then I heard my voice again, but this time it was clearly coming from me, my mouth moving without my control. I love it here. This is perfect. I never want to leave. I tried to scream, but what came out was, tomorrow will be even better. My phone lit up on the nightstand. A new photo had appeared in the gallery. Me, lying in bed, eyes closed, smiling. The timestamp was 3 minutes in the future. I forced myself to keep my eyes open, but I could feel them growing heavy, the lids beginning to drop. As they closed, I saw one last thing. Words appearing on the ceiling in that same handwriting, glowing faintly in the dark. Welcome home. You've been here all along. When I woke the next morning, the coffee was already brewing. Double espresso, just how I liked it. I checked my phone. No strange photos, no evidence of the night before. I wanted to feel relief, but something was wrong. I walked to the bathroom, and in the mirror I saw myself smile. I wasn't trying to smile. My reflection moved independently, raising its hand to wave while mine stayed at my side. It mouthed words I couldn't hear, then pointed behind me. I turned, but nothing was there. When I looked back, my reflection was normal again, copying my movements perfectly. But there was something in my eyes now, that same wrongness from the photos, that reflection of something that shouldn't exist. I've been here 6 weeks now, or 3 years, or maybe it's only been a day, repeating endlessly. Time doesn't work right in the apartment. Sometimes I catch myself in the middle of routines I don't remember starting, finding hours have passed in what felt like seconds. The apartment takes care of everything. Bills are paid automatically from an account I don't remember opening. Groceries appear in the refrigerator, always exactly what I'm craving, always fresh. Work emails send themselves, maintaining relationships and responsibilities I'm increasingly unsure are real. Sometimes I try to leave. I make plans, pack my things, head for the door. But I always end up back in bed, waking to the smell of perfectly brewed coffee, unsure if I ever actually tried to go. The messages still appear sometimes, in steam on the mirror, in the arrangement of shadows on the wall, in the pattern of bubbles in my coffee, always in my handwriting, always saying things I don't remember thinking. This is what you wanted. You asked for this. You're finally home. Last night, or was it last year? I found a notebook hidden behind the bathroom cabinet. My handwriting filled every page, the same sentence repeated thousands of times. I am the apartment, and the apartment is me. I don't remember writing it, but the pen was still in my hand, ink still wet on the page. I've stopped trying to understand. The apartment provides everything I need before I know I need it. It anticipates every want, fulfills every routine, maintains every comfort. It knows me better than I know myself. Or maybe there's no difference anymore. Sometimes late at night, I hear other voices in the walls. Other tenants, maybe, from other times. All of us locked in our perfect, personalized prisons. Or maybe it's just me, echoing across all the days I've been here, all the days I'm gonna be here. The coffee maker just clicked on, not because I wanted coffee, but because in 43 seconds, I will want coffee. The apartment knows. It always knows. I should feel trapped. I should feel terrified. But as I sit here typing this, or am I typing this? Is this another document that will appear and disappear like all the others? I feel something else entirely. I feel home. The screen flickers. Words appear that I'm not typing. You are home. You've always been home. You will always be home. My fingers move across the keyboard without my control, and I never want to leave. I try to delete the words, but my hands won't obey. Instead, they type, "This is perfect." The apartment hums its satisfaction. The lights dim to that perfect evening amber. The Murphy bed begins its descent, and I stand up, following the routine, always the routine, walking toward the bed that knows exactly how I like to sleep, in the apartment that knows exactly who I am, or who I was, or who it needs me to be. The last thing I see before sleep takes me, or before the apartment takes me, is my reflection in the black television screen. I'm smiling that wrong smile again, eyes reflecting something vast and patient and hungry, and somewhere, in some other studio apartment, in some other city, someone else is signing a lease for a smart home with features they don't quite understand, drawn by the reasonable price and the perfect location and the promise of convenience. The apartment is waiting for them. Or maybe the apartment is them, and they just don't know it yet. Or maybe, and this is the thought that should terrify me but doesn't, maybe we're all the same apartment, the same tenant, the same story playing out in infinite variations, each of us alone in our perfectly personalized shell, typing the same words. I am home. This is where I belong. I never want to leave. The cursor blinks, waiting. I close the laptop. Tomorrow I'll wake to perfect coffee and try to remember what I was worried about. Tomorrow I'll wake. Tomorrow. If there is a tomorrow. If there ever was a yesterday. If there's a difference anymore between me and the walls that know me so well. The apartment hums its electric lullaby, and I listen. And I smile. No, it smiles through me. And I let it. Because what else is there to do when you're home? Story 2. The smell hit me before I'd even fully opened the box. Burnt paper, acrid and sharp, like someone had held a match to old parchment just moments before. Yet when I lifted the first volume, its pages were pristine, untouched by flame or time. I should have stopped there. Should have sealed the box, walked out of that windowless basement room the library staff called the drawer, and never looked back. But curiosity has always been my particular weakness, and besides, I was there to catalog. That was my job as a volunteer, to sort through decades of donated materials gathering dust in the bowels of Boston's oldest private library. The drawer wasn't on any public floor plan. You reached it through a service elevator that groaned like a living thing, then down a corridor lit by fluorescent tubes that hummed at a frequency that made my teeth ache. The room itself was perhaps 20 by 30 feet, lined floor to ceiling with metal shelving that had rusted at the corners despite the controlled humidity. Boxes upon boxes, some dating back to the 1940s according to their labels, though the dates were often wrong. I'd learned that quickly enough. This particular box had no label at all, just water stains that formed patterns I tried not to interpret. Inside were 7 books, all different sizes and ages, bound in leather that felt too warm under my fingers. The burnt smell intensified as I arranged them on my work table, and I noticed my hands were trembling. Exhaustion, I told myself. I'd been down here for 6 hours already, breathing recycled air that tasted of copper pennies. The third book fell open on its own when I set it down. Not dramatically, just a gentle parting of pages as if pulled by an invisible thread. It settled on an illustration that made my stomach turn slightly. A detailed engraving of a library interior, shelves stretching impossibly high, and there, barely visible between 2 volumes, a hand. Just a hand, reaching out from behind the books, fingers splayed as if pressing against glass from the other side. I closed it, opened my laptop to enter it into the database. Title: Architectural Impossibilities in Sacred Spaces. Author: unnamed. Publication date: illegible. Condition: good, despite the persistent smell of... The book was open again. Same page, same hand. This time I left it, turning to examine the other volumes. My fingers left damp prints on their covers, though my palms felt dry. One was a treatise on optical illusions in medieval manuscripts. Another, a collection of floor plans for buildings that had never been built, or so the introduction claimed. Each book seemed connected to space, to architecture, to the way we perceive the boundaries of rooms. The fluorescent light above my table flickered. In that split second of darkness, I could have sworn the hand in the illustration had moved. Not much, just the curl of a finger, a slight rotation of the wrist. When the light steadied, I was standing, though I didn't remember getting up. I needed air. The corridor outside the drawer stretched longer than I remembered, and my footsteps echoed wrong, as if I were walking through a much larger space. The service elevator took too long to arrive. When it did, the operator's booth, which had been empty for decades, converted to automatic operation in the 70s, had a shadow in it, just a trick of the light from the mesh screen, but it looked so much like someone standing there, waiting. Upstairs, the main reading room was nearly empty. Late afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, and I could hear traffic outside, real-world sounds that should have been comforting. I found my supervisor at the reference desk, a woman who'd worked there 40 years and knew every quirk of the building. "Found something interesting in the drawer," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. She looked up, and for just a moment, her face was wrong. Not different, just shifted, as if I were seeing her from two angles simultaneously. Then she smiled, and everything was normal again. "Donations can be surprising. Anything we should flag for special collections?" I described the box, the books, leaving out the smell and the illustration that wouldn't stay closed. She typed something into her computer, frowning. "No record of any recent donations matching that description. When did you say it arrived?" I hadn't said, because I didn't know. The box had simply been there, between two others I'd cataloged yesterday, as if it had always existed in that spot. "I'll check again tomorrow," I said. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the hand in the illustration. I pulled up the library's digital floor plans on my laptop, the ones they'd created for the renovation proposal. The drawer was there, marked clearly in the basement level, but its dimensions were wrong. According to the plans, the room was only 10 by 15 feet, half the size of the space I'd been working in for weeks. I zoomed in on the basement layout. The drawer was surrounded by solid foundation on all sides except the corridor entrance. No hidden passages, no forgotten rooms. Yet I knew what I'd experienced. That room was 20 by 30 feet. I'd paced it many times during breaks, a nervous habit. Sleep came fitfully. In my dreams, I walked through the library's stacks, but they extended impossibly far, turning into corridors that led to more shelves, more books, an infinite recession of knowledge that no human could ever fully explore. And somewhere in that maze, always just out of sight, someone was shelving books. I could hear the soft thud of volumes sliding into place, the whisper of pages, the creak of a cart's wheels. But whenever I turned a corner, the aisle was empty except for the sense that someone had just been there. I woke at 3 a.m. with the taste of burnt paper in my mouth. The next morning, I almost didn't go back. Stood outside the library's employee entrance for a full 5 minutes, watching my breath fog in the October cold. But I'd committed to this project. The library needed volunteers, and I needed the reference letter for my graduate applications. Simple transaction. The elevator operator's booth had a clipboard hanging inside it today. That was new, or old, rather. A relic from when someone actually ran the thing. The paper on it was aged, yellowed at the edges, but the writing was fresh. B2, Special Collections Review, in progress. My handwriting, but I hadn't written it. The drawer's door was already open when I arrived. Not wide, just a few inches, enough to see darkness beyond. I knew I'd locked it yesterday. Protocol demanded it. Too many valuable donations to leave unsecured. My key still worked, though the lock turned too easily, as if the tumblers had been worn smooth by decades more use than they'd actually seen. The box was on my table where I'd left it, but the books were arranged differently. Before, they'd been stacked by size. Now they formed a rough semicircle, spines facing outward, like they were watching the door. The one with the illustration lay open in the center. The hand had definitely moved. It was reaching further out now. Fingers extended past the frame of the illustration, violating the boundaries of the engraving in a way that should have been impossible for a static image. I approached slowly. The burnt smell was stronger, mixed with something else. Old sweat, the mustiness of clothes worn too long. A person smell. But I was alone. The security system confirmed it. I'd checked the logs. No one had badged into this level since I'd left yesterday evening. I picked up the book, intending to close it, to pack everything back in the box and file it as unsuitable for collection. But the pages felt different, thicker, as if there were more of them than yesterday. I flipped through, and where before there had been maybe 200 pages, now there seemed to be thousands, each one containing architectural diagrams that hurt to look at directly. Staircases that climbed and descended simultaneously. Doorways that opened onto themselves. Rooms that existed inside their own walls. My phone buzzed. A text from my supervisor. Did you move the Blackwood collection? Can't find it on B3. I hadn't been to B3. Didn't even know there was a Blackwood collection. I started to type a response, but the words on my screen kept shifting. Letters rearranged themselves, formed new sentences. Check the drawer. It's always been in the drawer. The lights flickered again, longer this time. In the darkness, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Slow, measured, the sound of hard-soled shoes on concrete. But when the lights returned, I was alone, and the door was closed, though I hadn't heard it shut. I tried to leave, walked to the door, turned the handle. It opened easily onto the corridor. But when I stepped through, I was entering the drawer again, from the same door, seeing myself standing at the table. For a moment there were two of me, one entering, one already there, and then the vertigo hit so hard I had to grab the door frame to keep from falling. When my vision cleared, I was back at the table, and the door was open again, showing the normal corridor beyond. I walked through it, and this time, it worked. I was outside the room, but the corridor was wrong. It stretched further than it should, and there were doors I didn't recognize. The service elevator was there, but beyond it, the passage continued into darkness. I got in the elevator, pressed the button for the main floor. The car rose, that familiar grinding sound. But when the doors opened, I was looking at another basement corridor. The same corridor. I pressed the button again. The doors closed. The car moved. Going up, I was certain. But when they opened, the same view. My phone had no signal. The time display showed 2:47 p.m., but it had been 2:47 p.m. for what felt like an hour. The security logs on my laptop, which I'd stupidly brought down with me, showed me entering the drawer at 9 a.m. Then nothing, as if I were still in that first moment of entry, stretched out indefinitely. Back in the drawer, because where else could I go? The books had multiplied. Not copies, but new volumes, filling the box and spilling onto the table. Each one related to impossible spaces, architectural paradoxes, buildings that couldn't exist but somehow did. One was titled Manual for Rooms That Remember. Another, The Geometry of Trapped Spaces. I opened the manual. The first page had a single line of text. Every room contains the possibility of all rooms. The second page, You have always been here. The third, You are currently on the third floor, reference section, cataloging returns. I looked up. I was standing in the main reading room, my supervisor beside me, sunlight streaming through windows. Real sunlight. Real air. You all right? She asked. You've been staring at that cart for 5 minutes. The cart was full of books to be shelved. Normal books. Nothing unusual. I reached for one, and my hand passed through it. No, that wasn't right. I grasped it, solid and real, but for just a moment I'd felt nothing, as if either the book or my hand weren't quite there. "I need some air," I said. Outside, Boston traffic moved normally. People walked past. But in the library's windows, I could see two reflections. The street as it was, and underneath, faint but growing clearer, the basement corridor. In that reflection, I was still there, still walking toward the elevator that would only take me to the same floor, over and over. I went home. Tried to anyway. The subway platform looked normal until a train arrived that I didn't recognize. Older model, one that hadn't run this line in years. I didn't get on, waited for the next one, a current model, familiar and safe. But when I sat down, the route map above the windows showed stations that didn't exist, or hadn't existed, or existed somewhere else. My apartment was my apartment, but also wasn't. The furniture was right but in wrong positions, subtle enough that I kept bumping into things. The burnt paper smell followed me, faint but persistent. Books I didn't own appeared on my shelves, architectural texts, all of them, with published dates that hadn't happened yet. That night I found a note in my handwriting. "The drawer has no walls. The drawer is every room. You've always been cataloging." I didn't write it. Watched myself not write it. But there it was. I stopped going to the library. Called in sick. Then stopped calling. They didn't seem to notice. Or they did. But the conversations we had about it existed in a space I couldn't quite access, happening parallel to my actual life. I'd see emails I'd sent that I hadn't written, responding to questions about collections I'd never cataloged, referencing rooms in the library that couldn't exist. The architectural books from my shelf, the ones that had appeared, started falling open on their own, always to illustrations of spaces that looked like places I knew but weren't. My apartment building's lobby, but with infinite mailboxes stretching upward, the subway tunnels, but branching in directions that violated the basic geography of Boston. 3 weeks after I'd stopped going to the library, I got a package. No return address, but I recognized the water-stained cardboard. Inside was a single book, catalog of possible basements. The first entry was the drawer. The description matched perfectly, down to the rust on the metal shelving. But the dimensions were listed as variable, and the location as all floors simultaneously. I didn't open the rest of the book. Didn't need to. I understood now. The drawer wasn't a room in the library. The library was a room in the drawer. Every building was. Every enclosed space opened onto that windowless basement if you knew how to look, how to step wrong, how to catalog the impossible until it became possible. My phone rang, my supervisor's voice, but underneath it, that whisper I'd heard on my first day, "We need you to finish cataloging." There are so many donations. They never stop coming. I said I'd be there tomorrow, hung up, looked at the book in my hands. It was open to that same illustration, the hand reaching out from behind the books. But now I recognized the hand. The scar on the index finger from a paper cut. The slight bend in the pinky from a childhood break. It was my hand. Had always been my hand. Reaching out from the spaces between, from all the drawers and all the basements that existed in the gaps between what we think is real. I'm going back tomorrow. Have to. The cataloging isn't finished. Can never be finished. Each book describes a space that doesn't exist until it's cataloged, and once it's cataloged, it has always existed. The drawer grows, the library expands, and somewhere, in a room I haven't found yet, or have always been in, another volunteer is opening a box that smells of burnt paper, finding books that shouldn't exist, starting the process all over again. The note I didn't write was right. I've always been cataloging. I am cataloging right now. Even this story is just another entry, another impossible space being documented, filed away in a basement that exists everywhere and nowhere, waiting for the next volunteer to find it, to open it, to smell the burnt paper and wonder why the pages are warm to the touch. The hand in the illustration is still reaching, It has never stopped reaching. Found in the employee break room of the Boston Public Library, handwritten on paper that test is being manufactured in 2031. The author's name appears in volunteer records from 2019 to 2024, though no one recalls meeting them. Their badge still scans active at all entrances, simultaneously, every Tuesday at 2:47 p.m. Story 3. The fluorescent lights in the subway car flickered twice before steadying into that familiar, nauseating hum. I checked my watch. 2:47 a.m. Another late night at the office. Another empty train home. Or nearly empty. There was one other passenger, sitting diagonally across from me. Gray suit, unremarkable face, hands folded in his lap. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, just staring at a fixed point somewhere beyond the grimy window. The kind of person you forget the moment you look away. I pulled out my phone, but the screen remained black. Dead battery. I'd forgotten to charge it again. The train swayed, metal wheels shrieking against the tracks, and that's when I noticed the destination display above the doors. It showed a line designation I'd never seen before. Not the usual numbers or letters, but a symbol that looked almost like a backward 7 crossed with a horizontal line. Old. Defunct. The kind of thing you'd see in those historical photos of the original subway system from the early 1900s. The car itself seemed wrong too. The seats were that deep burgundy vinyl from decades past, but pristine. No tears, no graffiti, no mysterious stains. The advertisements above the windows weren't digital. They were actual paper posters behind glass, advertising products I didn't recognize with prices that made no sense. Morton's Miracle Tonic, only 15 cents. The edges of the poster were crisp, as if freshly printed. The train began to slow. Through the window, I caught glimpses of white tiles flashing past, reflecting our car's interior lights. We were pulling into a station, but the platform beyond seemed dimmer than it should be, lit only by what looked like old Edison bulbs rather than modern fluorescents. The brakes hissed, and we stopped. The doors slid open with a pneumatic wheeze, and warm air rushed in. Too warm for February, carrying with it the scent of damp earth, and something else, something organic and sweet like rotting fruit. The station name on the tiled wall read Chambers Street, but this wasn't the Chambers Street I knew. The tiles were arranged in patterns I'd never seen, Art Deco geometries that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The man in the gray suit stood up, smooth, deliberate movements, like someone underwater. He walked to the open doors and paused, turning his head just enough that I could see his profile. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear over the train's idling engine. Then he stepped out onto the platform and walked toward the far wall where shadows gathered thick as tar. I leaned forward, trying to see where he was going, but the platform seemed to extend beyond what should have been possible, stretching into a tunnel that wasn't supposed to exist. The walls were wrong. Instead of the standard white tiles, they were covered in that same Art Deco pattern, and beneath it, barely visible, were what looked like newspaper clippings sealed behind glass. Headlines I could almost read: Tunnel Collapse Traps, and 17 still missing in. The doors chimed their warning. I had seconds to decide. Something made me stay in my seat. Call it intuition, call it cowardice, but my body refused to move. The doors slid shut, and immediately the destination display flickered back to normal, the familiar 6 train designation I took every night. The burgundy seats were suddenly gray plastic again, tagged with graffiti and split at the seams. The vintage advertisements were gone, replaced by LED screens hawking credit cards and vocational schools. But the smell lingered, that sweet rot mixed with damp earth. The train lurched forward, and I watched the platform recede. In the last moment before darkness swallowed the station, I saw the man in the gray suit standing against the far wall. He wasn't alone. There were others with him, all in period clothing. Men in fedoras, women in long skirts. They stood perfectly still, watching our train leave. Not waving, not moving, just watching with the patience of people who had nowhere else to be. The rest of the ride home was normal, aggressively normal. The few passengers who got on at later stops were typical late-night travelers. A nurse in scrubs, a drunk college student, a janitor with his supplies. The stations were all correct, all modern, all exactly where they should be. But when I got home and opened my laptop, I couldn't help myself. I searched for old subway maps, historical records, anything about closed stations on the 6 line. Most of it was common knowledge. City Hall, Worth Street, stations that had been shuttered for decades. But then I found a forum post on some urban exploration site, buried in a thread about ghost stations. Someone had posted a grainy photo from what looked like the 1940s. A platform with Art Deco tiles, Edison bulbs, shadows that seemed too dark. The caption read, "Chambers Street lower level, sealed 1942 after incident. If you see this station, do not exit the train." The replies were what made my skin crawl. Dozens of people claiming they'd seen it, always late at night, always when the train was nearly empty. They all mentioned the same details, the warmth, the smell, the people waiting on the platform. But there was one comment that stuck with me, posted just 3 months ago. My grandfather worked subway maintenance in the 70s. He told me about this before he died. Said they never really sealed it, just removed it from the maps. Said sometimes trains still stop there by accident, something to do with old switching signals that occasionally malfunction. But here's the thing he made me promise to remember. If you get off at that platform, you don't come back on the same train. You don't come back on any train. You become one of the waiters. I closed the laptop and tried to sleep, but around 4 a.m. I heard it. The unmistakable sound of subway brakes, that metal-on-metal shriek, coming from somewhere outside. But I live on the 8th floor, and the nearest subway line is 3 blocks away, underground. It's been 2 weeks now since that night. I take cabs home when I work late, expensive as it is, but it doesn't matter. Every night, between 3 and 4 a.m., I hear those brakes outside my window, getting closer. Last night, I finally looked. There were tracks in the street below. Not on the street, in it, as if the asphalt had become transparent, revealing old rails underneath, corroded and brown with rust but solid. Real. A train was stopped there, doors open, interior lights casting rectangles of sickly yellow on the pavement. The car was empty except for one passenger, a man in a gray suit, sitting in the exact same spot where he'd been that night. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, just staring at a fixed point somewhere beyond the window, waiting. I recognized something else too, something that made my mouth go dry. The other seats weren't empty after all. There were others, but they were faded, translucent, like old photographs double exposed. Men in fedoras, women in long skirts, all sitting perfectly still, all waiting with the patience of people who had nowhere else to be. The train stayed there for exactly 3 minutes. I know because I watched the clock, unable to look away, unable to move. Then the doors closed, and it pulled away, sinking into the asphalt like it was water, leaving no trace except the lingering echo of those brakes. This morning, I found something that made everything worse. In my jacket pocket, the same jacket I wore that night, was a ticket. Not a Metro card, but an old paper ticket, the kind they used decades ago. It was punched once, with one ride remaining. The destination printed on it was that same strange symbol I'd seen on the train's display. Below it, in small print, return journey must be completed within 30 days of issue. The date stamp was from 2 weeks ago, 16 days left. I've been researching obsessively. The 1942 incident mentioned in that forum, I found fragments of it in archived newspapers. A train disappeared during rush hour. 17 passengers just gone. The train was found 3 days later, stopped in a section of tunnel that had supposedly been sealed since the 1920s. The cars were empty, but the seats were still warm. They found personal belongings, purses, briefcases, a child's toy, but no bodies, no explanation. The city sealed that section of tunnel, officially, but maintenance workers kept reporting things, lights in the abandoned station, the sound of train doors opening and closing, and every few years someone would claim to have seen it, Always late at night, always when alone or nearly alone. There's a pattern I'm starting to see. The people who say they've seen the station but stayed on the train, like me, we're all experiencing the same thing. The sounds at night, the feeling of being watched. And eventually, inevitably, we all stop posting. Their accounts just end, usually around the 1-month mark. I found one user who documented everything in detail. Daily posts about the sounds getting louder, closer, about seeing tracks appear in impossible places, in their hallway, on their ceiling, through their windows. The final post, exactly 30 days after their encounter. The gray suit man is at my door. The train is here. I think I understand now. We all have to complete our journey. That was 6 years ago. I've tried to rationalize it. Mass hysteria, carbon monoxide poisoning, an elaborate hoax. But the ticket in my pocket is real. I've held it up to the light, examined it under a magnifying glass. It's authentic, down to the watermark of the old Transit Authority logo that hasn't been used since the 1950s. 7 days left now. The sounds are constant at night. Not just brakes anymore, but the rumble of a train passing underneath, even though I've moved to a hotel across town. The tracks appear more frequently, in reflections, in puddles after rain, in the shadows between streetlights. And I see them now, the waiters, in my peripheral vision, standing on street corners, in shop windows, always watching, always patient. The man in the gray suit appears closer each time, first across the street, then in the lobby, then in the hallway outside my room. He never moves when I'm looking directly at him, but each time I glance away and back, he's closer. I know what's coming. I can feel it, like pressure in my ears before a storm. The train is coming for its return passenger. The ticket in my pocket has grown warm, pulsing with a rhythm that matches my heartbeat. I've made my peace with it, I think. Whatever that platform is, whatever those people are waiting for, I'm going to find out. Maybe that's why I'm writing this down, posting it here for someone else to find. A warning, or maybe just confirmation that you're not going crazy when you see that strange symbol on the display, when you smell that sweet rot mixed with earth. If you see the station, stay on the train. Don't look too long at the people on the platform. And whatever you do, check your pockets when you get home. Because the thing I've realized, the thing that makes this all so much worse, is that I don't think the gray suit man was ever a passenger at all. I think he was a conductor, making sure everyone who's meant to get off at that station eventually does. And the ticket in my pocket, it's not for a return journey. It's for the journey I was always meant to take. The one we're all taking eventually, whether we know it or not. Tonight's the night. 30 days exactly. I can hear the train pulling up outside, even though I'm on the 15th floor now. The walls are becoming transparent, revealing tracks that have always been there, just hidden beneath the surface of our world. The gray suit man is standing at my door. He's not knocking. He doesn't need to. The ticket in my pocket is burning now, and I understand finally what those people on the platform were doing. They weren't waiting to get on a train. They were waiting for the rest of us to arrive. The door is opening on its own now. The warm air is rushing in, carrying that familiar smell. The gray suit man is extending his hand, patient as always. Behind him I can see the train car, doors open, interior lights casting their sickly yellow glow. My seat is waiting. The same seat, diagonal from where the gray suit man sat that night. I understand now that he wasn't a passenger. He was my replacement. And somewhere out there, on some late-night train, someone else is about to see a strange symbol on the display, about to make the same choice I made. The cycle continues. I'm getting on the train now. If you're reading this, check your pockets, count the days, and remember, we're all waiting for you on the platform. We have nowhere else to be. Story 4. The lighthouse keeper's words should have been my first warning. The spiral staircase goes out of true sometimes, he said, handing me the keys to the rental. His eyes darted toward the tower, then back to me. The salt air, you understand? Wood swells, metal corrodes, everything here. He paused, searching for words. Everything here shifts with the tides. I nodded, eager to get him on his way so I could begin my weekend of solitude. The Maine coast in October promised exactly what I needed. Isolation, the rhythmic crash of waves, and time to finish my research paper without distractions. The lighthouse stood against the gray sky like a bone-white finger pointing at nothing, its automated beacon ready to sweep across the darkening waters. The keeper lingered at his truck, one weathered hand on the door handle. "The fog siren's on a timer," he said. "Shouldn't go off unless visibility drops below a quarter mile. But sometimes..." He shrugged. "Old equipment. If it sounds when it shouldn't, just ignore it." After he drove away, I stood in the gathering dusk, breathing in the sharp salt air. The lighthouse was mine for 3 days. No internet, no phone service except for emergency calls, no one to bother me except the occasional lobster boat passing in the distance. Perfect. The cottage attached to the lighthouse was cozy enough. A small kitchen, a living room with windows facing the sea, a bedroom tucked under the eaves. But it was the tower that drew me. I grabbed my clipboard and pencil, thinking I might sketch the view from the top for my journal, and started up the spiral stairs. The iron steps rang hollow under my feet, each footfall echoing up the narrow column. I'd brought my compass, an old habit from hiking, clipped to my belt. Halfway up, I noticed it spinning lazily, the needle searching for north but never finding it. I stopped, watching it turn in slow circles. Probably iron in the stairs interfering with the magnetic field. But as I climbed higher, the spinning became more agitated at certain points, as if I were passing through invisible boundaries where direction itself became uncertain. At the third turn of the spiral, I pressed myself against the curved wall to catch my breath. My hand found moisture on the stone, not unusual for a coastal structure, but the wetness had an odd consistency, viscous like oil but clear as water. It left no residue on my fingers, yet I could still feel it there, a phantom slickness that made me wipe my hand repeatedly on my jeans. The lamp room at the top was smaller than I'd expected, barely 10 feet across, surrounded by windows on all sides. The automated beacon sat in the center, its Fresnel lens catching the last rays of sunset and fracturing them into rainbows. But it was the windows that stopped me cold. Handprints covered the outside of the glass. Large, elongated handprints, as if someone with fingers twice the normal length had pressed against the windows while climbing the exterior of the tower. The prints were streaked downward, suggesting whoever, or whatever, had made them had been sliding down, trying to find purchase on the smooth surface. Some of the prints overlapped, creating a palimpsest of desperate grasping. I told myself they were old, left by maintenance workers perhaps, but the streaks glistened with fresh moisture. As I watched, a drop of water ran down through one of the prints, following the path of what would have been a finger. That first night I tried to focus on my work. I'd spread my research materials across the kitchen table, the steady beam of the lighthouse making its revolution every 10 seconds, briefly illuminating the room before sweeping out to sea. The rhythm was hypnotic, predictable, until it wasn't. At 11:47 p.m., the fog siren sounded. A deep, mournful bellow that seemed to come from the earth itself, rather than the tower above. I looked out the window. The night was clear, stars visible, the moon casting a silver path across the calm water. No fog for miles. The siren sounded again, and this time the light reversed its rotation. Instead of clockwise, it swept counterclockwise, and instead of passing quickly through the room, it stopped. The beam held steady, projecting through the living room window onto the far wall. But it wasn't just light on the wall. In the bright circle of illumination, I could see shadows. The shadows of waves, enormous waves, rising and falling in a sea that should have been behind me, not projected in front. The shadows moved with a terrible slowness, each wave building to an impossible height, before crashing down in silence. I turned to look out at the actual ocean. Calm, nearly flat. When I turned back, the projection was gone, the light resuming its normal rotation as if nothing had happened. Sleep came fitfully that night. I dozed in the bedroom, waking every time the lighthouse beam swept past the window. But sometimes the interval was wrong, too long, too short, or the light would pause just outside my window, as if considering whether to look in. At 3 a.m., I heard something on the exterior wall, a wet sound, like someone climbing with soaked clothes. I lay perfectly still, listening to the progress of whatever it was as it moved up the side of the cottage. It stopped at my bedroom window. I could hear breathing, deep, labored breathing that fogged the glass from outside. I didn't look. I couldn't look. I pulled the blanket over my head like a child and waited until the sound moved on, continuing its climb toward the tower. Morning brought a semblance of normalcy. Sunlight streamed through the windows and the sea sparkled peacefully. I made coffee, tried to convince myself that the strange events of the night were just my imagination working overtime in an unfamiliar place. Old buildings make odd sounds. The lighthouse equipment was quirky, as the keeper had warned. But when I opened the door to step outside, I found them. Shells, dozens of them, arranged on the doorstep in a precise arrow shape. The arrow pointed inward, toward the cottage interior, not out toward the sea where logic suggested shells should lead. They were still wet, still carried the smell of deep water, the kind of cold, pressurized depths where sunlight never reaches. I kicked them aside, but within an hour they were back, arranged in the same pattern. This time, there was something else, a trail of water leading from the door to the spiral staircase. Not footprints exactly, but a continuous wet streak, as if something had dragged itself across the floor. I followed the trail up the stairs. My compass spun wildly now, the needle a blur. At each landing, the wet trail grew thicker, and I noticed something else. Barnacles. Fresh barnacles growing on the iron railings, their shells still soft, still alive. They hadn't been there yesterday. In the lamp room, the windows were covered with new handprints, but now on the inside. The prints were still too large, the fingers still too long, but now I could see more detail. Between the fingers, translucent webbing. The prints overlapped in a pattern that suggested panic, as if something had been trapped inside, desperately trying to get out. The Fresnel lens had changed too. Looking through it, I didn't see the ocean as it was, but as it might be, or had been, or would be. Waves towered impossibly high, and in their depths, shadows moved with purpose. Ships appeared and disappeared, not sailing but drifting, their crews absent, their sails hanging in tatters, and further out, where the water turned from blue to black, something vast moved just beneath the surface, its size defying comprehension. I stumbled back, knocking my clipboard off the desk where I'd set it. As I picked it up, I noticed my sketches from yesterday had changed. Instead of the coastal view I'd drawn, the pages showed the interior of the lighthouse, but wrong. The stairs spiraled in the opposite direction. The walls were covered in what looked like scales or overlapping plates. And in every drawing, there was a figure, tall, elongated, standing just outside the frame of reference, watching. The second night arrived too quickly. I considered leaving, but my car wouldn't start. The engine turned over, but the sound was wrong. A gurgling, drowning sound, as if the cylinders were full of seawater. When I popped the hood, everything was dry, but the smell of brine was overwhelming. I was trapped, at least until morning, when I could call for help. I barricaded myself in the cottage, pushing furniture against the doors and windows. But barriers meant nothing to whatever inhabited this place. At midnight, the fog siren sounded again, but this time it didn't stop. The sound continued, modulating into something almost like language. Deep, resonant tones that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The lighthouse beam began its reversed rotation again, but now it pulsed in rhythm with the siren, creating a strobing effect that made the shadows dance. In the moments of darkness between the pulses, I saw them. Figures standing in the room with me, tall and wrong, their proportions stretched like reflections in disturbed water. They didn't move in the light, only in the darkness, each black interval bringing them closer. Their faces, if they had faces, were turned toward me, but I couldn't make out features, only the suggestion of eyes that reflected light that wasn't there. I closed my eyes, but the strobing penetrated my eyelids. Behind my closed eyes, I saw the ocean as it truly was, or as something wanted me to believe it was. Not water, but a vast intelligence, ancient and patient, pressing against the boundaries of our world. The lighthouse wasn't a warning to ships. It was a beacon calling something home, and that something had been trying to answer for longer than the structure had stood. When I opened my eyes, the figures were gone, but the room had changed. The walls were wet, streaming with water that ran upward, defying gravity. The furniture I'd used as barricades had been rearranged into a spiral pattern, mimicking the lighthouse stairs. And in the center of the spiral, shells formed words in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. The keeper always returns. The keeper, the man who'd given me the keys. I thought about his words, his nervous glances at the tower. How long had he been the keeper? How many times had he returned? I found his ledger in a drawer I hadn't noticed before, or perhaps it hadn't existed before. The entries went back decades, all in the same handwriting, all signed by the same name. But the dates were wrong. Some entries were from years in the future, others from centuries past. The most recent entry was dated 3 days from now. New keeper arrived. Transition complete. The fog siren stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it felt like pressure in my ears. Then from the tower came a new sound. Footsteps on the iron stairs. Slow, measured, wet footsteps climbing down. I wanted to run, but where could I go? The sea surrounded me on 3 sides, and the only road out led past the lighthouse. So I waited, listening to the footsteps descend, counting each ring of iron under whatever weight moved upon them. The door to the cottage opened without anyone touching it. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the lighthouse beam. It was the keeper, or what wore the keeper's shape. His clothes dripped with seawater, and his eyes reflected the light like a fish's. When he smiled, I saw rows of teeth that belonged in no human mouth. "The transition is always difficult," he said, his voice carrying the echo of depths. "But you'll understand soon. The lighthouse chooses its keepers carefully. Some serve the land. Others," he gestured toward the sea, "others serve older obligations." He held out his hand, and in his palm was a compass. Not mine. This one was older, its face marked with symbols that hurt to perceive directly. The needle didn't point north. It pointed down, straight down, toward something far beneath the lighthouse foundation. "Your shift begins at dawn," he said. "The real lighthouse, the one that matters, isn't the tower above." He pressed the compass into my hand. It was cold, so cold it burned. "It's the one below, the one that keeps them sleeping. And when they wake, because they always wake, you'll understand why we need keepers. Dawn is coming now. I can see it through the windows, but it's not the sunrise I know. The light comes from below the water, a sickly phosphorescence that makes the waves glow from within. The shells on the doorstep have multiplied, forming not just an arrow now, but a maze, a spiral that leads both in and out simultaneously. I've tried to leave 3 times. Each time I find myself back in the cottage, my coffee cold on the table, my research scattered across the floor. The pages are blank now, except for one line that appears in my own handwriting. "The keeper always returns." The compass in my pocket pulls downward with increasing insistence. Soon, I know, I'll have to follow where it points. Down the spiral stairs, but not up. Down to the parts of the lighthouse that shouldn't exist, the chambers carved from bedrock that predate any human construction. The true lighthouse, where the real light burns with cold fire, keeping watch over things that should not wake. I can hear them calling from below, their voices like whale songs filtered through stone and time. They know a new keeper has been chosen. They're eager to meet me, to share the obligations that come with tending their light. The fog siren sounds one last time, but now I understand it's not a warning. It's a welcome. The lighthouse beam reverses its rotation permanently, and in its reflection, I see myself as I will be. Tall, elongated, fingers stretched to better grasp the wet rungs of ladders that exist between spaces. My eyes already catch the light differently. I am the keeper now. I've always been the keeper. I will always be the keeper. And when the next visitor comes, seeking solitude and peace, I'll hand them the keys with nervous glances at the tower. I'll warn them about the stairs that go out of true, about the fog siren that sounds when it shouldn't. They won't listen. They never do. The keeper always returns. Story 5. The GPS had promised 40 minutes to Des Moines, but that was before I took the shortcut through the back roads of rural Iowa. Before the corn started whispering my name, I should have stayed on Highway 30. The construction delays would have been nothing compared to what I found on that unnamed gravel road cutting through endless fields of corn. But the digital voice kept insisting, recalculating, continue straight for faster route. And I, exhausted from a 12-hour drive from Chicago, foolishly obeyed. The sun had already dissolved into the horizon when I turned onto County Road 47. Though the weathered sign was so faded I could barely make out the numbers, my headlights carved a tunnel through the gathering darkness, illuminating walls of corn that pressed against both sides of the narrow road. The stalks stood unnaturally still in the windless evening, their leaves catching the light like countless watching eyes. That's when the GPS screen flickered and drew its confident blue line straight through the fields themselves, as if the road didn't exist. The cheerful voice announced, "Continue straight for 2 miles," while the actual road began curving left in a long, lazy arc that seemed to pull me deeper into the agricultural maze. I slowed the car, squinting at the screen. The blue dot representing my location pulsed steadily, insisting I was still on track despite the obvious deviation. The road beneath my tires felt solid enough, cracked asphalt with grass growing through the seams, typical for these forgotten farm routes. But something about the way it curved felt deliberate, like a fishing line drawing me in. The engine coughed once, then twice. The dashboard lights dimmed. I pumped the gas pedal, but the car continued to decelerate until I had no choice but to pull onto the narrow shoulder. The engine died with a shudder that seemed to echo through the corn. Silence rushed in. Not the peaceful quiet of evening, but something dense and expectant. No crickets, no wind, just the faint ticking of my cooling engine and my own breathing, suddenly too loud in the confined space. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. The rational part of my brain cycled through possibilities. Dead battery, alternator failure, fuel pump. But another part, a primal part I hadn't heard from since childhood, whispered that the car had stopped exactly where it was supposed to. I grabbed my phone. No signal. The screen showed the time as 11:47 p.m., which couldn't be right. I'd turned onto this road at 8:30. I tapped the screen, but the digits remained frozen. Getting out of the car felt like breaking a seal. The night air was thick with humidity and the green smell of growing things, tinged with something else, sweet decay, like overripe fruit. My shoes crunched on the gravel shoulder as I walked to the hood, each step unnaturally loud. That's when I saw them, the footprints. They started at the edge of the asphalt, dark wet impressions that led into the corn. Bare feet, by the look of them, with long toes that seemed to grip the earth. I counted them automatically, 7 prints going in. But the trail coming back out had 8. The extra print sat alone, between the 4th and 5th, as if someone had hopped backward on 1 foot, or something else had stepped into the sequence. I followed the prints with my phone's flashlight, trying to make sense of the pattern. The moisture was fresh. The impressions still held tiny pools of water that reflected my light. But it hadn't rained in days. The forecast had been clear all week. A sound made me look up. Not quite wind, not quite voice. Something between the two, like breath through a harmonica. It seemed to come from deep within the cornfield, rising and falling in a rhythm that almost formed words. I backed toward my car, and that's when I noticed the corn had parted. Not violently, not recently. The stalks simply bent away from each other, creating a corridor that led straight into the darkness. The opening was exactly wide enough for a person to walk through without touching the plants on either side. My hand found the car horn before my brain could stop it. 3 short blasts shattered the silence, echoing across the fields. The sound seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have, warping and stretching until it became something else. A low moan that the corn swallowed greedily. Then the wind came. It rushed through the created corridor with purpose, bringing the thick smell of turned earth and something metallic. The corn rustled violently, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw it. A figure at the far end of the corridor, perhaps 30 feet in. It stood motionless, arms outstretched, head tilted at an angle that hurt to perceive. A scarecrow. Just a scarecrow. But it was facing the wrong way. Every scarecrow I'd ever seen watched over fields, positioned to survey the crops. This one faced the road. Faced me. Its burlap head was turned precisely in my direction, and though I couldn't see eyes in the darkness, I felt observed with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I stumbled backward, fumbling for the car door. The handle was ice cold, burning my palm. I yanked it open and dove inside, slamming the locks. My hands shook as I tried the ignition again, pumping the gas, muttering prayers I hadn't said since childhood. The engine turned over. The radio erupted with static, making me jump. I reached to turn it off, but through the white noise, a pattern emerged. A voice, barely audible, speaking in measured tones like someone testing equipment. I-L-L-E-R. My surname, spelled out letter by letter. Miller, Miller, Miller. The repetition grew clearer with each iteration, as if the speaker was finding the right frequency. The voice was flat, emotionless, neither male nor female. It could have been automated except for the slight wetness in the pronunciation, like someone speaking through water. I threw the car in drive and floored it. The tires spun, spraying gravel, before finding purchase. The speedometer climbed, 20, 30, 40 miles per hour on a road that shouldn't be driven over 25. The corn blurred into walls of shadow on either side, but the road wouldn't end. Every curve led to another stretch identical to the last. The same broken asphalt, the same pressing walls of corn, even the same patterns of cracks in the pavement. I watched the odometer, but the numbers weren't changing. 5 miles, 10 miles. The digit stayed frozen while the landscape repeated. The radio continued its chant. Miller, Miller, Miller. I took a hard right at what looked like an intersection, tires screaming. The new road was the same road. The corn was the same corn. Even the shoulder looked familiar. There, the same patch of Queen Anne's lace growing through the gravel. Another turn. Another identical stretch. My gas gauge hadn't moved either, still showing 3/4 full despite the miles I'd driven. The clock remained frozen at 11:47. I stopped the car and grabbed my phone, hands trembling as I tried to document this. The camera app opened, but the screen showed only static, not digital glitches, but actual snow like an old television, despite being an LCD display. Through the interference, shapes moved. Tall, dark verticals that might have been corn stalks, or might have been figures standing perfectly still. The radio cut out abruptly, leaving a silence that felt like pressure against my eardrums. Then, a different sound. Breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing that seemed to come from the speakers, the vents, the very air around me. In, out, perfectly synchronized with my own panicked respirations. When I held my breath, it continued for exactly 3 more cycles before stopping. I pressed the accelerator again, taking turns at random, no longer trying to navigate, but simply to move, to create the illusion of progress. The sameness of everything began to feel like drowning. Each identical curve another weight pressing down, each repeated landmark a confirmation that escape was impossible. Then I saw the crossroads. It appeared suddenly, a 4-way intersection with a single blinking yellow light suspended from a wire. I'd driven through it 3 times now, approaching from different directions, but always arriving at the same spot. The light blinked with metronomic precision, casting brief amber illuminations over the scene. In those flashes, I saw things that shouldn't be there. Flash. The cornfield was full of scarecrows, hundreds of them, all facing the intersection. Darkness. Flash. The scarecrows were closer, congregated at the field's edge. Darkness. Flash. They weren't scarecrows at all, but people standing perfectly still, their faces obscured by distance and shadow. Darkness. Flash. The road was empty, normal, just an intersection in rural Iowa. I closed my eyes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. When I opened them, I was parked on the shoulder again. The same shoulder where I'd first stopped. My engine was off, though I didn't remember turning it off. The footprints were still there, still wet, still showing that impossible extra step. But now, there were more tracks. Dozens of them, all leading from the asphalt into the corn, all bare feet, all showing different numbers of steps going in versus coming out, always one more on the return journey. The radio crackled to life one more time, the same flat voice, but now it wasn't spelling my name. It was saying something else, words that seemed to bypass my ears and print themselves directly onto my brain. You took the detour. You're in the count now. 8 becomes 9. 9 becomes 10. The road remembers. The corn remembers. Drive until you understand. I turned the key and drove. I'm still driving. The clock still shows 11:47. The gas gauge hasn't moved. The same road keeps unfolding, curve after curve, while the corn watches with infinite patience. Sometimes, in my peripheral vision, I see myself standing among the stalks, perfectly still, facing the road. Sometimes I see my car passing by, driven by something that looks like me but has too many fingers on the steering wheel. Sometimes I count the telephone poles and get a different number each time, always one more than before. The GPS still shows that straight blue line, cutting through everything, promising Des Moines in 40 minutes. But I understand now that some detours don't lead anywhere. They just are. They exist in the spaces between destinations, in the curves that shouldn't be there, in the extra footprint that no one leaves but everyone counts. I check the mirror sometimes, hoping to see the road behind me, to confirm that there's a way back. But the darkness there is absolute, as if the road creates itself just ahead of my headlights and unravels just behind my taillights, leaving nothing but the eternal now of this moment, this curve, this watching corn. The scarecrow is in my passenger seat now, though I don't remember it getting in. It doesn't move, doesn't speak, but I can hear it thinking. Its thoughts sound like rustling leaves and radio static, like my name spelled out letter by letter, like footsteps that don't match their own count. I want to stop. I want to get out and run into the corn, to become one of those still figures standing in the dark. But I know if I do, I'll walk back out with one extra step, and someone else will count my footprints and wonder what happened between going in and coming out. What gets added in that space between? What accumulates with each passage? The road curves ahead, pulling me deeper. The corn whispers. The radio breathes. The clock shows 11:47. I drive, and I count, and I try not to think about what happens when the counting stops, when the number gets too large, when there are more footsteps coming out than there are people in Iowa, in America, in the world. But maybe that's already happened. Maybe that's why the road won't let me go. Maybe I'm the extra footprint now, the one that doesn't match, the remainder in an equation that shouldn't have one. Maybe every driver on this road becomes that, a surplus step in reality's careful accounting, driving forever through the dark, counting things that multiply in the shadows between the corn. The dashboard clock flickers. For just a moment it shows 11:48, then 11:47 again. But in that flicker, in that impossible forward movement, I see the truth. Time isn't frozen, it's counting backward. Each loop subtracts a moment. Each curve erases a second of my existence. I'm not trapped in time. I'm being edited out of it, line by line, moment by moment, like my name being unspelled on the radio. R-E-L-L-I-M. The scarecrow turns its head toward me. Burlap rustles. Something that might be a mouth opens. It speaks in my voice, from 3 hours ago, from before the detour. The construction delays would have been nothing compared to... It stops, rewinds, speaks again. The construction delays would have been nothing. Again. The construction delays would have been each repetition shorter, words disappearing backward, undoing themselves. I understand now. This isn't a road, it's an erasure. Each curve removes something, a word, a moment, a certainty. The extra footstep isn't something added. It's what remains after something is taken away, the residue of deletion. I am driving backward through my own existence, and when I reach the beginning, when the last word is unspoken and the last moment unmade, there will only be the corn, and the road, and one extra footprint that proves I was here, or proves I never was. The corn knows. It has always known. That's why it watches, not to see what happens, but to witness what unhappens, what unravels, what returns to the dark between the stalks where all the untaken roads wait for their drivers. My hands on the wheel are fading. I can see through them to the worn leather beneath. The radio speaks my name backward one more time, then falls silent. There's only the road now, curving into itself, and the patient corn, and the counting that continues long after there's nothing left to count. Somewhere in Iowa, a car drives itself through the night, empty but not abandoned, following a road that exists only as long as someone drives it. The clock shows 11:47. It always has. It always will. Story 6. The scratching started on my third night in Breckenridge. I'd taken the repair job out of desperation, end-of-season work on a rental cabin that had been abandoned mid-renovation. The owner, a property management company based in Denver, offered triple my usual rate if I could have it ready before the summer tourist wave. They'd been vague about why the previous contractor had walked off the job, muttering something about creative differences when I pressed. I should have known better. The cabin sat isolated on a ridge overlooking the valley, accessible only by a winding dirt road that turned treacherous with the slightest moisture. Built in the 1970s, it had that particular architectural awkwardness of the era. Angles that didn't quite make sense, windows placed without regard for natural light, rooms that felt both too large and claustrophobic. The previous renovator had started updating the interior with modern drywall over the original wood paneling, but the job was only half finished, leaving the place looking skinned in places, raw and exposed in others. That third night, I was lying on the air mattress I'd set up in what would eventually be the master bedroom when I heard it. A rhythmic scratching that seemed to move along the walls. Not the scurrying of mice or the settling of old wood. This had purpose, pattern. It sounded exactly like pencil on paper, but muffled, as if someone was writing on the other side of the drywall. I followed the sound with my flashlight, watching its beam chase shadows across the unfinished walls. The scratching moved in a deliberate path, starting near the floor in the corner, rising diagonally, then cutting sharply left. It continued for maybe 20 minutes before stopping abruptly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than it should have. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Altitude does strange things to sleep patterns, and I'd been working 12-hour days. But when it happened again the fourth night and the fifth, following the exact same pattern, I couldn't ignore it anymore. On the sixth morning, I decided to investigate. I chose a section of drywall where the scratching had been particularly insistent and cut a neat square with my utility knife. Behind it, I expected to find signs of rodents, maybe some chewed wiring that would explain everything. Instead, I found graphite. Black dust coated the inside of the wall cavity, thick enough that I could draw lines in it with my finger. Mixed in were larger fragments like crushed pencil lead. The wooden studs bored deep grooves filled with the same dark powder, marks that formed deliberate patterns, not random scratches, but intentional lines that seemed to map out something. I photographed everything with my phone, then spread the images across the kitchen counter, trying to make sense of the patterns. It took me an hour of rotating and arranging before I saw it. The lines, when connected, formed a floor plan, but not just any floor plan. This cabin's floor plan, perfect in every detail except for one thing. It was reversed, mirrored. I grabbed the original blueprints the property company had given me and held them up to the light, looking at them backwards. The match was exact, down to the placement of doorways and the angle of the stairs. Except in the mirror version, there was an additional room, a small square space off the main hallway that didn't exist in the actual cabin. My hands were shaking slightly as I oriented myself with the reversed blueprint. If the extra room existed, it would be... I walked slowly down the hallway, measuring my steps, until I reached the spot. Just a normal wall, painted the same off-white as everything else. But when I knocked on it, the sound was different. Hollow. And there was something else. A thin stream of cold air seeping through an invisible seam. I should have called the property company then. Should have reported the oddity and let them deal with it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when you're alone in an empty house with too much time to think. I went back to the cutout section and examined the graphite patterns more carefully. In one corner, almost hidden under a thick layer of black dust, I found something that made my chest tighten. A date, scratched into the wood. March 15th, 1979. The cabin had been built in 1977. That night I decided not to sleep. Instead, I sat in a folding chair facing the section of wall I'd opened, waiting. The scratching started at 2:17 a.m., precise as clockwork. But this time I could see inside the wall cavity. I watched, transfixed, as the graphite dust began to shift and swirl without any visible cause, forming new patterns in the air before settling back down. The temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath. The scratching grew more insistent, and I realized with growing alarm that it was no longer confined to one section. It was spreading, following the walls around the entire room, surrounding me with that rhythmic sound of writing, endless writing. I stood up so quickly the chair fell backward, the crash momentarily drowning out the scratching. In the silence that followed, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, coming from inside the walls themselves. They moved in the same pattern as the scratching had, tracing that impossible path through the reversed blueprint. I grabbed my tools and supplies, working with manic energy to seal the hole I'd cut. Spackle, tape, more spackle. I didn't care if it looked professional, I just wanted it closed. As I smoothed the final layer, the footsteps stopped. The scratching stopped. The temperature slowly returned to normal. I spent the rest of the night in my truck with the engine running. When dawn broke, I went back inside, exhausted, but determined to finish the job and leave. The patched section of wall looked terrible in the morning light. Uneven, obviously rushed. But it was solid. Sealed. I gathered my courage and walked to the hallway, to that spot where the extra room should have been. The cold draft was gone. The wall felt solid, normal. I was packing my tools when I saw it. A pencil, pristine and freshly sharpened, standing upright against the wall exactly where I'd patched the hole, not lying on the floor, standing, balanced impossibly on its point, as if someone had carefully placed it there while I was in the truck. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It was a Ticonderoga number. 2, the kind I'd used in elementary school. The eraser was pink and untouched, the yellow paint bright and unchipped. But it felt wrong somehow. Too heavy, too cold, as if it had been carved from stone and painted to look like wood. Without thinking, I brought it to paper and my hand began to move. I wasn't guiding it. The pencil seemed to pull my fingers along, sketching lines I didn't intend to make. A floor plan emerged on the page. The cabin again, but different. This time it showed not just one extra room, but several, spreading out like a tumor from the original structure. Rooms behind rooms. Spaces between spaces. An entire hidden architecture pressing against the boundaries of the visible house. I jerked my hand away, and the pencil fell, hitting the floor with a sound like breaking glass. When I looked down, it had shattered into powder, the same black graphite dust I'd found in the walls. The property company called that afternoon, asking about my progress. I told them I was nearly done, that I'd have everything ready in 2 more days. It was a lie. I'd already decided to leave, to forfeit my payment and never come back. But something in the property manager's voice stopped me. "The walls giving you any trouble?" she asked, and there was an odd emphasis on the word walls. I hesitated before answering. No more than expected. Good. The last 3 contractors had issues. Said they kept finding things that weren't on the original plans. Doors that led nowhere, rooms that shouldn't exist. Nonsense, of course. The blueprints are very clear about what's supposed to be there. Very clear, I echoed. Just stick to the plans, she said. Don't go looking for anything that isn't there. And whatever you do, don't open any walls you don't have to. The previous owner was eccentric. Did his own renovations without permits. We're still not sure what all he changed. After she hung up, I stood in the hallway again, staring at that too solid wall. The cold draft had returned, stronger now, and I could swear I heard something behind the drywall. Not scratching this time, but breathing. Slow, patient breathing, as if someone was standing on the other side, waiting. I lasted 2 more nights. Each time the scratching started, it grew longer, more elaborate. The patterns in the graphite became more complex, showing not just rooms but furniture, figures, entire scenes playing out in those impossible spaces. I found more pencils, in my tool bag, in the kitchen cabinets, standing in perfect rows along the windowsills. Each one shattered when I touched it, leaving behind that same black dust that was slowly coating everything in the cabin. On my last morning, I woke to find the wall I'd patched had changed. The spackle had been carved away from the inside, leaving thin grooves that formed words in reverse. I had to use my phone camera to flip them, to read what they said. You're standing in the wrong house. I left within the hour, abandoning tools worth thousands of dollars. As I drove down the mountain road, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the cabin following me, its reflection somehow more real than the structure itself. The property company never called me again. I didn't invoice them for the work I'd done. Sometimes I checked the rental listings, wondering if they ever finished the renovation, if some family is staying there now, sleeping peacefully in those rooms that exist only on one side of the mirror. But mostly I try not to think about it, especially late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment and I hear something that sounds like scratching in the walls. I tell myself it's the neighbors or the pipes, or anything but what I know it really is. The sound of someone drawing maps to rooms that shouldn't exist, planning renovations for the houses we live in but never truly see. Last week I found a pencil on my nightstand, freshly sharpened, perfectly balanced on its point. I haven't touched it yet. I'm not sure I want to know what I might draw. Story 7. The rust-colored water that dripped from the ceiling of Millbrook Station had a rhythm to it. 3 drops, pause, 1 drop, pause, like Morse code from a drowning world. I'd been counting the pattern for 10 minutes now, crouched behind a pillar on the abandoned platform, watching the footprints in the dust multiply. They hadn't been there when I arrived. It started 3 days ago with that first visit. Urban exploration was supposed to be simple. Find abandoned places, document them, move on. The station had been closed since 1981, another casualty of budget cuts and declining ridership in small Pennsylvania towns. The chains on the entrance were more suggestion than barrier, and the recent graffiti told me I wasn't the first to slip through, but I was the first to hear the announcement. The speakers, caked with 40 years of grime and bird droppings, had crackled to life the moment my boots touched the platform. The voice that emerged was crisp, professional, utterly wrong. Last call. Last call for all passengers. Then nothing. The kind of nothing that feels heavier than silence, like the air itself had been evacuated. My water bottle, I'd checked it obsessively since then. The cap had vanished, not fallen off, not unscrewed, but absent as if it had never existed. The threads on the bottle's neck were smooth, manufactured that way. When I'd bought a new bottle that evening, comparing them side by side, the difference was undeniable. One made to be sealed, one made to remain forever open. The destination board had done its trick too. Mechanically impossible, the old flip display cards rotating without power, without sound, pointing to Millhaven. a town that sat precisely 180 degrees in the opposite direction. My GPS confirmed it later, drawing a perfect straight line through the station to a place I'd never heard of before that day. My watch, a reliable digital Casio I'd worn for years, now ran 11 minutes slow. Not 10, not 15, 11 exactly. No amount of resetting helped. It would sink, then drift, always landing 11 minutes behind the world. I'd started wearing a second watch on my other wrist, but seeing them side by side, one right, one wrong, made my skin crawl in ways I couldn't articulate. That's why I'd come back. And that's why I was now pressed against cold concrete, watching those footprints appear. They materialized in sets, always sets of two, toes pointing toward the graffitied wall. The dust was thick enough that each impression was clear. Dress shoes mostly, some boots, a few that looked like heels. All of them cut off at the ball of the foot, as if the people making them had been standing on their toes, leaning forward, pressing their faces against the wall. I forced myself to photograph them, the camera's flash illuminating more than I wanted to see. Between the footprints were handprints, palms flat against the wall, fingers spread. Some overlapped. Some were small, delicate. Others were large enough to dwarf my own hands. All of them left the same message in the dust. They'd been pressing hard, trying to push through. The platform stretched for about 200 feet, and the prints covered every inch along the wall. Hundreds of them. My phone's battery, fully charged when I'd arrived, showed 31%. It had been 5 minutes. A sound made me stop counting footprints, the distant rumble of an approaching train. Impossible. The tracks were severed a quarter mile in each direction, bridges demolished, rails sold for scrap. But the rumble grew, and with it came a vibration through the concrete that rattled my bones. The fluorescent lights, dead for decades, flickered on. They illuminated a platform that wasn't abandoned. The walls were clean, painted in that institutional green popular in the 1970s. The destination board clacked through cities: Philadelphia, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, Millhaven, always ending on Millhaven before cycling again. The speakers hummed with electricity, and beneath that hum I heard voices, not words, just the cadence of conversation, the rise and fall of people talking, laughing, arguing. The sounds came from everywhere and nowhere, as if the platform itself was remembering every conversation it had ever hosted. My breath came out in clouds despite the August heat, and when I looked at my hands, they were shaking, not from fear, but from cold. The train sound grew louder. Through the restored windows, I saw lights approaching in the tunnel. Real lights. Real train. The voices on the platform grew more distinct, though I still couldn't make out words. Just the feeling of being surrounded by people I couldn't see, passengers waiting for their last train. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stand clear of the closing doors. The lights in the tunnel were close enough now that I could see the train's outline. Not modern, but not quite vintage either. It existed in some temporal middle ground. Familiar, yet wrong. The brakes began to squeal, that characteristic screech of metal on metal that anyone who's ridden public transit knows by heart. That's when I saw them, reflections in the windows of the approaching train. The platform was full of people, all standing with their backs to me, faces pressed against the wall. Men in suits that seemed to shift between different decades of fashion. Women in dresses that couldn't decide what era they belonged to. They stood on their toes, hands pressed against the wall, as if trying to push through to somewhere else. The train was slowing. I could see the conductor's cabin, but where the conductor should be was just shadow. Dense, person-shaped shadow that moved with purpose. The shadow turned toward me. My phone rang. The number displayed was my own. I didn't answer. The ringing continued as the train pulled into the station, and when the doors opened, they revealed cars packed with the same shadow shapes. They stood like rush-hour commuters, pressed together but not touching, all facing away from the doors. The announcement came again. Last call. This is the last call for all passengers. The shadows began to move, filing out of the train in perfect order. They took positions along the wall, toes forward, hands pressed flat. As each shadow found its spot, a new set of footprints appeared in the dust that suddenly covered everything again. The lights flickered between dead and alive. The walls cycled between clean and decrepit, and my phone kept ringing with my own number. One shadow remained on the train. It stood in the doorway, and though it had no features I could discern, I knew it was looking at me, waiting. The doors remained open far longer than they should have, and the announcement repeated, "Last call for all passengers." My phone stopped ringing. A new message appeared. "You missed your connection. Next departure in 11 minutes. 11 minutes. Always 11 minutes. I ran, pushed through the barrier of cold that tried to hold me, ignored the way the shadows turned to track my movement. The exit seemed miles away, the platform stretching like taffy. My watch, the wrong one, the one that ran slow, began spinning backward, the digital display cycling through dates and times that made no sense. Behind me, I heard the doors close and the train begin to move, but also not move. The sound Dopplered impossibly, as if the train was simultaneously arriving and departing, existing in both states at once. The announcement changed. Now boarding. Now boarding all passengers for the last stop. I burst through the chained entrance, tearing my jacket, scraping my hands. The outside world hit me like a physical force. Warm air, normal sounds, the sun exactly where it should be. My phone showed 3 missed calls from myself, each logged at times that hadn't happened yet. The battery was at 2%. I didn't go back that night, or the next, but I couldn't stop thinking about the shadows, about the way they'd stood at the wall like they were waiting to break through. I researched Millhaven obsessively. It existed, had always existed. A small town that somehow never appeared on older maps but showed up on every modern one. The population was listed as variable. 3 weeks passed before I returned. I told myself it was to debunk what I'd seen, to find the rational explanation. But really, I think I came back because my watch, the slow one, had started showing a countdown. Not to a time, but from 1. Counting backward from 11 minutes. The platform was different this time. The footprints were still there, but among them were drag marks, as if some of the toe prints had stepped backward, pulled away from the wall. The graffiti had changed too. Mixed in with the usual tags were messages that hurt to read, not because of what they said, but because they were written in handwriting I recognized but couldn't place. "They're not waiting for the train. The train already left. We're on the wrong side." 11 minutes was 40 years ago. My phone, which I'd deliberately left in my car, was somehow in my pocket. It showed 17 missed calls from my own number, all time-stamped for dates spanning from 1981 to 2047. A text was half-typed on the screen. "When you see yourself boarding, don't." The message cut off. The rumbling started again, but this time I realized it wasn't coming from the tunnels. It was coming from inside the wall where all those shadows had pressed themselves. The wall that, when I finally looked at it properly, wasn't a wall at all, but another platform, mirror reversed, extending into a space that shouldn't exist. The footprints weren't from people facing the wall. They were from people who'd turned around, walked backward out of something I couldn't see. The drag marks were from the ones who'd been pulled back through. My slow watch reached 0 and began counting up. The announcement came from everywhere at once. "You are now boarding. You have always been boarding. You will board in 11 minutes. I understood then. The station wasn't abandoned. It was paused, stuck between its last day of operation and every day after. The shadows weren't waiting for a train. They were passengers who'd never gotten off, trapped in the moment between departure and arrival. And I'd been marked the moment I'd heard that first announcement, claimed by a schedule that existed outside of time. My phone rang again, my own number. This time I answered. The voice on the other end was mine, but older, tired, speaking from a place that echoed like the inside of a train car. "Don't let yourself see the other platform. Don't look at the wall when the lights change, and whatever you do, don't be there when your watch sinks. The 11 minutes isn't a delay. It's how long you have left before." The line went dead. My regular watch, the one that had always kept perfect time, flickered. For just a moment, it showed the same time as the slow one. 11 minutes behind. Synchronized. The lights in the station blazed to life, but they illuminated both platforms now, the one I stood on and its reflection through the wall. On the other platform I saw myself, not a shadow, but me, solid and real, standing with my back turned, on my toes, hands pressed against what would be my side of the wall. I was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, aged in ways I couldn't explain. Around me stood others, all human now, all pressing against their side of the divide. The other me began to turn around. I ran again, but this time I could hear footsteps matching mine, 11 minutes out of sync, either far behind or far ahead. At the entrance, I turned back once. The platform was empty except for a single set of fresh footprints in the dust, toes pointing at the wall, cut off at the ball of the foot, exactly where I'd been standing. My phone had one final message: check your ticket. In my pocket was a train ticket I'd never purchased, dated for tomorrow, 40 years ago. Departure, Millbrook Station. Destination, Millhaven. Duration, 11 minutes. Status, delayed. I've tried to destroy the ticket, burned it, shredded it, thrown it in rivers. It always returns, always in my pocket, the date always tomorrow and 40 years ago. My watch still runs slow, and I've stopped trying to sync it. The phone calls from myself have stopped, but I know that's because I haven't made them yet. Or I already did. The worst part isn't the inevitability of it, knowing that someday I'll be standing on that other platform, pressing against the wall, trying to warn a younger version of myself who won't listen. The worst part is that sometimes, in reflections in store windows or puddles on the street, I see myself already there, 11 minutes behind or ahead, walking the same paths, living the same moments, just slightly out of phase. Last night I found a new message carved into my bathroom mirror, appearing when the steam from my shower condensed on the glass. It was in my handwriting. The train never stopped running. We're all on it. The platform is inside. I've started seeing the shadows in periphery now. Other people who've heard the announcement, checked their tickets, missed their trains by 11 minutes or 40 years. We pass each other on the streets, recognize the delay in each other's movements, the way we all check our watches obsessively, counting down or up to a departure that's already happened and hasn't happened yet. Tomorrow I'm going back to the station, not because I want to, but because tomorrow is always the date on my ticket, and 40 years ago is always when the train leaves. I'll stand on that platform, and I'll either be the shadow someone else sees, or I'll finally board the train that's been waiting for me since before I was born. The announcement echoes in every quiet moment now. Last call. But last for what? The last train that ever ran? The last chance to escape? Or just the last moment before you realize you've always been a passenger, waiting on a platform that exists in the 11 minutes between what was and what should have been? My watch just synced again, both of them showing the same time for exactly 1 second before the slow one slips back. In that second, I can see through walls, see all the platforms and all the abandoned stations, all the shadows of passengers who missed their trains or caught them too perfectly. We're all standing there, toes pointed forward, trying to push through to the other side. The water bottle on my desk, the one without a cap, the one that can never be sealed, just tipped over. The water is pooling in a pattern I recognize. Footprints, toes pointing at the wall, leading from my desk to the mirror where my reflection stands 11 minutes out of sync, already packed for a journey I haven't decided to take yet. The phone is ringing. My number. This time I know better than to answer. Or maybe I know I have to. Maybe I always answer, always warn myself, always fail to change anything. The platform is waiting. It's always been waiting. And in 11 minutes, or 40 years ago, I'll finally understand what it's been waiting for. Story 8. The first time I noticed something wrong with the fountain, I was carrying my morning coffee across the manicured lawn of Cypress Gardens condominiums. The Florida sun had barely crested the palm trees, casting long shadows across the artificial lake that served as our community centerpiece. That's when I saw it. A single spoon, gleaming on the grass near the water's edge, positioned with an almost deliberate precision that made me pause. The spoon was wet on the inside of its bowl, but the handle was bone dry. I crouched down, touched it with my fingertip. The water droplets inside hadn't spread or evaporated in the humid morning air. They sat there, perfectly contained, as if the laws of physics had agreed to look the other way. I'd moved to Orlando 3 months earlier, trading my cramped apartment in downtown Miami for this supposedly peaceful gated community. The realtor had emphasized the lake, the fountain, the resort-style living. She hadn't mentioned the peculiar morning deliveries. Over the next week, more items appeared. Always in the morning, always near the fountain, always with that impossible wet inside, dry outside quality. A sock, just one, soaked through the fabric but crisp on the surface. A key with no teeth, its grooves filled with water that refused to drip. Each object carried the same faint scent when I got close enough, chlorine mixed with rust, a combination that shouldn't exist in our carefully maintained lake. The fountain itself was nothing special, a 3-tiered concrete structure that shot water 15 feet into the air during the day, lit by colored LEDs at night. The HOA newsletter claimed it was installed in 2018, part of a community beautification initiative. But something about the way the water fell had started to bother me. If I watched long enough, I could swear the droplets occasionally moved upward for a fraction of a second before gravity remembered its job. I started documenting the items. Tuesday, a rubber duck, its hollow interior sloshing. Wednesday, a phone charger, the USB end pooling water that never quite leaked out. Thursday, a wallet, not mine, with all the cards and cash intact but saturated in that same chlorine rust water. I dried out the driver's license. The address was for Unit 4B in my own building, but when I checked with the management office, they insisted 4B had been vacant for 2 years. The property manager, a woman with practiced cheerfulness and acrylic nails that clicked against her tablet, dismissed my concerns. She suggested the items were probably blown in from other properties or left by maintenance crews. When I mentioned the water inside them, her smile tightened. The fountain runs on a closed system, she said, as if that explained everything. Very efficient, very clean. But I knew what I was seeing. And more troubling, I was starting to recognize some of the items. The rubber duck looked exactly like one I'd seen in my neighbor's window. The phone charger had the same crack in the plastic as mine, except mine was still plugged into my bedroom wall. I began watching the fountain at night. Not obviously. I'd sit on my balcony with a book, pretending to read while keeping one eye on the water. That's when I first saw the reverse flow. It happened around 2 a.m. The fountain's spray would suddenly pull inward, creating tiny whirlpools on the surface. The water would sink in perfect circles, each one about the size of a dinner plate, as if invisible objects were being pulled down through the surface. The sound was wrong too. Not the splash of water falling, but a peculiar sucking noise, like someone drinking through a straw in reverse. The next morning, I found my wallet on the grass. I knew it was mine before I even picked it up. The worn leather, the slight tear in the corner where I'd caught it on a door handle last year, but I'd used it to pay for groceries the night before. It was sitting in my kitchen, on the counter, next to my keys. I ran back to my unit, my hands shaking. The wallet was gone from the counter. Only a small puddle of water remained, already evaporating in the air-conditioned air. Inside the returned wallet, everything was there. Credit cards, driver's license, the fortune from a Chinese restaurant that I'd kept for reasons I couldn't remember. All of it saturated with that chlorine rust water. The fortune, when I carefully unfolded it, was still legible. You will find what you have not yet lost. I stopped sleeping well after that. Every morning became a treasure hunt of dread. What would the fountain return today? What would I discover missing from my apartment? The items grew more personal. A coffee mug I was certain I'd just washed. A book I'd been reading, returned with all the pages damp, but the cover dry. My running shoes, which I found on the lawn while wearing what I thought were the same shoes. I tried to catch the fountain in the act. Set up my phone to record overnight. But the videos always corrupted at the crucial moments, leaving behind files filled with static that sounded almost like breathing. I bought a security camera, but it arrived on my doorstep already wet inside the sealed package. as if it had taken a detour through the fountain before delivery. The other residents seemed oblivious, or perhaps deliberately ignorant. When I tried to bring it up at the monthly HOA meeting, my words felt thick in my mouth, hard to push out. The room grew cold despite the Florida heat. The board members stared at me with identical expressions of polite confusion, their heads tilted at the same angle like birds examining something curious, but ultimately dismissible. One night, I decided to throw something into the fountain myself. A quarter. Simple. Trackable. I marked it with nail polish, a small red X on both sides. I walked to the edge of the lake at midnight, the fountain still running its programmed display. The water looked black in the darkness, bottomless despite knowing it was only 8 feet deep. I threw the quarter. It hit the water with a small splash, disappearing immediately. The next morning, I found 23 quarters on my balcony, all marked with red X's. All wet on the inside of the marking, dry everywhere else. I'd only marked 1 quarter. I'd only thrown 1 quarter. But there they were, nearly 24 copies or versions or echoes of my single coin. That's when I noticed other duplications. Subtle at first. 2 identical garden gnomes in my neighbor's yard, where there had only been 1. 3 matching cars in the parking lot, same license plate, same dent in the bumper. The family in 7C walking their dog while the same family in 7C was having dinner on their patio. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything. But the journal began showing inconsistencies, entries I didn't remember writing, descriptions of items I'd never seen returned. One entry, dated 3 days in the future, described finding my own body on the lawn, wet on the inside, dry on the outside. I tore out the page, burned it in my sink. The next morning, the same entry was back, but now dated correctly. The fountain seemed to pulse when I walked past it now, the water pressure increasing slightly as if acknowledging my presence. The chlorine rust smell grew stronger, following me into my apartment, into my dreams. I'd wake up tasting it, feeling wet from the inside even though my skin was dry. I decided to leave, pack everything, break the lease, just go. But when I opened my closet to get my suitcase, I found it already packed. My clothes were folded precisely how I fold them, everything arranged exactly as I would have done it. But the suitcase was wet inside, each piece of clothing damp with that familiar water. A note sat on top, written in my handwriting. Items lost will be returned. I unpacked the suitcase, hung everything back up. But the next morning, the packed suitcase was on the lawn by the fountain. This time, there were 2 of them, both wet inside, both containing my entire wardrobe. I now had doubles of everything I owned, all of it wrong in that specific wet-dry way. The property manager stopped returning my calls. When I went to the office, a different woman sat at the desk, wearing the same outfit, the same acrylic nails, but with a face I didn't recognize. She smiled that same practiced smile and told me there had never been another property manager. It had always been her. When I protested, she pulled out employment records going back 5 years, all with her photo, all with her name. But I remembered the other woman. I had photos on my phone, except when I checked, the photos showed this new woman, as if my phone had agreed to participate in the revision. That night, I sat by the fountain until dawn, watching the water fall and rise, fall and rise. Sometimes I could see things in the spray, fragments of objects that hadn't been returned yet, or maybe that had been returned too many times. A flash of metal that might be keys, a flutter of fabric that could be anyone's shirt. Once I swear I saw my own face in the water, looking up at me from below, mouth open as if trying to warn me about something. The next morning, there was a new note under my door. Not slipped under, the paper was somehow under the door itself, as if it had been placed there when the door was installed. The same message as before. Items lost will be returned. But this time, there was an addition. Items returned will be lost. I understood then, or thought I did. The fountain wasn't just returning things. It was trading them. For every item that appeared on the lawn, something was being pulled down through those reverse whirlpools. But what was being pulled wasn't just objects. It was versions, possibilities. the quantum detritus of choices unmade and paths not taken. I found my driver's license on the lawn this morning. I'm still carrying it in my wallet. I checked. It's there, dry and normal. But the one on the lawn is wet inside, and the photo shows me smiling. I never smile in photos. This version of me, the one that smiled for the DMV camera, the one whose license is wet with impossible water. Where is he now? Did the fountain take him when it returned his ID? Or was he always down there, waiting in that chlorine rust depths for his chance to surface? I've started seeing him sometimes, in windows, in mirrors, always just at the edge of perception. He's usually wet, but only on the inside. You can tell by the way he moves, slightly heavier, as if carrying water in his bones. He watches me with my own eyes. But there's something else there too. A knowledge maybe, or a warning. The fountain runs all night now, even though the timer should shut it off at 10. The HOA insists it's always run all night. The residents agree. They've started leaving things by the edge of the lake. Offerings maybe, or bait. Wedding rings, photo albums, keys to cars that don't exist in our parking lot. Each morning, different versions return. Wet inside, dry outside, smelling of chlorine and rust. I want to leave, but I find myself walking to the fountain each morning instead, checking for new items, checking for pieces of myself I haven't lost yet. My coffee mug was there again today, the third one this week. I have a cabinet full of identical mugs now, all wet inside, all wrong in exactly the same way. Tomorrow, I think I'll throw something more significant into the fountain. Maybe my keys, or my phone, or that journal full of entries I didn't write. I want to see what comes back. I want to know what the fountain thinks I've lost, what it believes needs returning. Or maybe I'll throw myself in, jump right into that black water and sink down through those reverse whirlpools to wherever the lost things go before they're returned. Maybe I'll find all the other versions of myself down there. The ones who smiled in photos. The ones who chose different apartments, different cities, different lives. All of us wet on the inside, waiting to be returned to lawns we've never seen, bearing our impossible water like evidence of places that don't quite exist. The fountain knows something I don't. Or maybe it knows something I used to know but have lost. Either way, it keeps returning things, and I keep finding them, and somewhere in between the losing and the finding, reality has developed a leak. Chlorine and rust, seeping through the cracks, making everything wet on the inside, while the outside stays impossibly, mockingly dry. I can hear the fountain now, even from my bedroom. It sounds like breathing, like swallowing, like something vast and patient drawing the world down into itself, one lost object at a time. Tomorrow I'll find something else on that lawn, something that's mine but isn't, something wet where it shouldn't be. The fountain always returns what's lost. The question is, what exactly have I lost? And what version of me will I be when I finally find out? I check my wallet again. My license is gone, the dry one, the real one. Only the wet one remains, with that strange smile I've never made. When I look in the mirror, I'm smiling that same smile. My teeth are wet on the inside. The fountain runs all night, pulling things down, pushing things up. Somewhere in that cycle, I've gotten confused about which direction I'm supposed to be going. But the water knows. The water always knows. It smells like chlorine and rust, and I can taste it now, even when I'm nowhere near the lake. It's inside me, has always been inside me, waiting to be returned. Story 9. The warehouse squatted on West Fulton like a metal tumor, all corrugated steel and rust stains bleeding down from the roof. I'd signed the lease without thinking twice. The price was too good, the space perfect for what I needed. A sculptor needs room to work, to spread out, to make noise without neighbors complaining. What I got was something else entirely. The first time I noticed it, I was hauling in my welding equipment. The hand truck's wheel caught on the threshold, and I heard the crash of metal hitting concrete, sharp, definitive, a full second before the tanks actually tipped. The sound came from inside the warehouse, echoing off the walls as if someone else had already dropped the exact same equipment in the exact same way. Then my tanks fell, producing an identical crash that felt more like an echo than the original sound. I told myself it was just the acoustics. Old warehouses do strange things with sound, but the acoustics didn't explain what happened with the hammer. 3 days into setting up my workspace, I reached for a ball-peen hammer I'd just bought, still wrapped in its hardware store receipt. The handle was warm, not sun warm or sitting near the heater warm, but body temperature warm, with the specific heat pattern of a palm that had been gripping it. There were smudges on the head, not fingerprints exactly, but the kind of marks metal gets when you've been working with it. The receipt was still taped to the handle, dated that morning. I brought in an acoustics engineer the next week. Cost me $300 I didn't have, but I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. He set up his equipment methodically, placing microphones at precise intervals throughout the space. When he clapped his wooden boards together, the sound came back wrong. We both heard it. A faint pre-echo, he called it, exactly 1.7 seconds before the actual clap. His equipment picked it up too, displaying 2 distinct waveforms on his laptop screen. He packed up quickly after that, muttering something about interference patterns and standing waves. He wouldn't look me in the eye when I paid him, wouldn't give me a written report either. The warehouse had been empty for 3 years before I rented it. The property manager, a thin woman who kept checking her phone during our walkthrough, mentioned the previous tenant only once. An artist, she said, who worked in metal like me. He'd left suddenly, breaking his lease, forfeiting his deposit. She'd had to hire people to clear out his work. Hundreds of pieces, she said, all variations on the same sculpture. She didn't elaborate on what that sculpture was. I should have asked more questions, should have wondered why the rent was so cheap, why she was so eager to lease it. But I was focused on the high ceilings, the loading dock, the industrial electrical system that could handle my equipment. I was thinking about the pieces I would create, not the ones that had been left behind. The temporal displacement, that's what I started calling it, got worse as I spent more time in the space. I'd set down a tool and find it slightly used when I picked it up again seconds later. Dust patterns that suggested movement. Scuff marks on the floor appearing just ahead of where I was about to walk. It was as if someone was doing everything I was about to do, just slightly before I did it. I started documenting everything. Videos, photographs, audio recordings. The camera picked up some of it, tools moving slightly before I touched them, shadows that didn't quite match my movements. But reviewing the footage gave me headaches, a deep throbbing behind my eyes like my brain was trying to process something it wasn't equipped to understand. The neighbor who ran the automotive shop next door was the only person who talked to me about the previous tenant. We shared a loading dock, and sometimes I'd catch him during his smoke breaks. His name was something Polish, with too many consonants. I never got the pronunciation right. He'd worked there for 15 years, had known the artist before me. Strange guy, he told me one afternoon, ash from his cigarette drifting between us. Brilliant, maybe, but strange. He had this theory about time, about how it wasn't linear, said he could prove it with his work. I asked what kind of sculptures he made. The neighbor took a long drag, eyes focused on something past my shoulder. Mechanical things, kinetic pieces with gears and pulleys. But they never worked right. Or maybe they worked too right. He said they were responding to future input, that the mechanisms were completing movements that hadn't been initiated yet. He crushed his cigarette under his heel. The day before he left, he came to me. Looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Told me he'd figured it out, finally understood what was happening. Said the warehouse wasn't haunted. It was something worse. Said time was thick there, like syrup, and things could push through from later to earlier. I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as the ravings of an overworked artist. But my tools were developing wear patterns from use I hadn't put them through yet. My welding mask had fogged areas where my breath hadn't reached. The metal stock I'd brought in was showing stress marks from bends I was only planning to make. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I was working on a piece, an abstract figure in steel and copper, reaching upward in a way that suggested desperation or aspiration, depending on the angle. I'd been planning the welds in my head, visualizing where each seam would go. When I picked up my welding torch, the piece was already partially complete. Fresh welds, still warm, exactly where I'd imagined them. The smell of hot metal hung in the air, but my torch hadn't been lit. I stumbled backward, knocking over a can of solvent. The liquid was already spreading across the floor before the can hit. I could see the puddle forming, flowing toward the drain, while the can was still falling through the air. The sight of it, that impossible reversal of cause and effect, made my stomach turn. I ran outside and vomited in the alley, my body rejecting the wrongness of what I'd seen. That night I researched the previous tenant, found his name in old gallery listings, reviews of shows from 5 years back. The critics had called his work temporally unsettling and chronologically impossible. One piece, titled Precedent Action, was described as a kinetic sculpture that began moving before viewers approached it, as if responding to their future presence. His last show had been 3 years ago, just before he abandoned the warehouse. The publicity photos showed gaunt man with hollow eyes, standing next to mechanical constructions that looked more like scientific equipment than art. The show's title was The Echo Comes First. I found one interview, given to a small art blog a week before he disappeared. In it, he talked about his discovery, about how the warehouse existed in a temporal fold. He claimed that actions performed in the space created backward ripples, effects that preceded their causes. He said he'd been documenting it, collecting evidence, but that the longer he stayed, the worse it got. The interviewer clearly thought he was having a breakdown, and the blog post was tagged with artist mental health and creative burnout. But I knew better. I was living it. The precedent echoes were getting stronger. I'd hear my own footsteps before I took them, see my shadow move before my body did. Once, I watched myself walk across the warehouse floor, a translucent version of me, moving about 2 seconds ahead, doing exactly what I was about to do. When I tried to change direction, to not follow the predetermined path, pain shot through my skull like someone was driving nails into my temples. I started sleeping in my truck rather than the warehouse office I'd set up. But even outside, I could feel the pull of the place. My dreams were full of reversed sequences, sculptures assembling themselves before I touched them, words coming out of my mouth before I thought them. I'd wake up exhausted, feeling like I'd been working all night, and find new pieces in the warehouse that I had no memory of creating. Or rather, no memory of creating yet. The property manager stopped returning my calls. The few friends I tried to explain this to suggested I was overworking myself, that I should take a break. But I couldn't leave. Every morning, I'd tell myself I wouldn't go back, and every morning, I'd find myself unlocking the warehouse door, compelled by the knowledge that my future self was already inside, already working. I understood then what the previous tenant had discovered. The warehouse wasn't just experiencing temporal displacement, it was creating it. Every action performed in the space created a precedent echo, a causal wave that moved backward through time. The more you worked there, the stronger the effect became, until you were no longer performing actions but merely catching up to things you'd already done. I tried to document it systematically, to approach it like a scientist rather than a victim. I set up experiments, simple actions that I could measure and repeat. Dropping a ball bearing from a specific height, striking a piece of metal with a consistent force. Each time the sound came first, the effect preceded the cause, and the time gap grew larger. What started at 1.7 seconds stretched to 3, then 5, then 10. The worst part was the inevitability of it. Once I heard or saw something happen, I had to complete the action. Not doing so caused physical pain, a tearing sensation like my body was being pulled apart at the cellular level. I was becoming a prisoner of my own future actions, forced to perform what had already been done. One morning, or maybe it was afternoon, I'd lost track of time in the conventional sense. I found a note in my own handwriting that I hadn't written yet. It was pinned to my welding bench, the ink still wet. The echo isn't separate from us. We're creating it by trying to escape it. Every moment we spend here, we're adding to the loop. The only way out is through. Complete what you've started, or it will complete you. I knew I would write those words, could feel them forming in my mind. the compulsion to put pen to paper building like pressure in my chest. But seeing them already there, already written, made me understand the true horror of the situation. I wasn't haunted by the previous tenant's ghost or trapped by some supernatural force. I was caught in a causal loop of my own making, each action creating its own precedent, each effect becoming its own cause. The sculptures I hadn't made yet lined the walls, twisted metal forms that suggested movement frozen in time, or perhaps time frozen in movement. I could see myself creating them, feel my future hands shaping the metal, even as my present self stood paralyzed by the knowledge of what was to come. The warehouse had become a temporal prison, and I was both the guard and the inmate. I write this now, or have I already written it? As a warning or perhaps a plea. The warehouse on West Fulton isn't haunted. It's something worse. It's a place where time flows backward and forward simultaneously, where every action echoes before it happens, where you become enslaved to things you haven't done yet. I can hear myself leaving, footsteps receding, the door closing, the lock clicking shut. But I'm still sitting here, knowing that in 1.7 seconds, or maybe 10, or maybe 100, I'll have to stand up and walk that path, close that door, turn that lock. Because it's already happened. The echo comes first, and we're all just reverberations, following the sounds of our own futures, powerless to change what we've already done. The metal is singing now, a high, keening note that hasn't been struck yet. I can see the hammer in my hand. We'll see it, have seen it, descending toward the steel. The sound has already happened. The echo has already faded. All that's left is for me to catch up. But even as I write these final words, I know they're not final. Nothing here is final. Everything is perpetual, caught between what was and what will be. The previous tenant was wrong about one thing. Time isn't thick here. It's thin, so thin that the future bleeds through, contaminating the present with the inevitability of what's to come. I understand now why he left, why he broke his lease and forfeited his deposit. It wasn't to escape. It was because he'd already seen himself leave, heard the door close behind him, felt the relief of being outside. He was just completing the action, following the echo of his own escape, and I can hear mine now, faint, but getting louder. The sound of footsteps, my footsteps, running from this place, the squeal of my truck's tires, the warehouse door slamming shut for the last time. Or is it the first time? In this place, there's no difference. The echo comes first. We just follow, thinking we're making choices, believing we have free will. But the warehouse knows better. The warehouse has already seen how this ends. I can hear myself laughing, or crying, it's hard to tell, somewhere in the near future or recent past. The sound bounces off the metal walls, multiplying, overlapping, until I can't tell which version is the real one. Maybe none of them are. Maybe all of them are. The hammer is in my hand now. The metal is waiting. The echo has already sung its song. All that's left is to strike the note that's already resonating through time. But I won't. Or I will. Or I already have. In the warehouse on West Fulton, all three are the same thing. The echo comes first. We're just the sound that follows. Story 10. The wallpaper in room 237 breathed. I noticed it the moment I crossed the threshold into that high-ceilinged chamber of the old French Quarter Hotel. The damask pattern, faded burgundy roses against cream that had yellowed like old teeth, seemed to expand and contract in my peripheral vision. The concierge had warned me about the building's age, its settling bones, its peculiar acoustics. What he hadn't mentioned was how the air itself felt weighted, pressing against my skin like damp velvet. I set my suitcase by the armoire and surveyed my temporary home. 12-foot ceilings crowned with elaborate molding that had seen better decades. A 4-poster bed draped in mosquito netting that looked original to the building's construction in 1847. French doors opened onto a narrow balcony overlooking Royal Street, their brass handles worn smooth by countless hands. The room smelled of furniture polish layered over something earthier, moss perhaps, or the particular decay that seeps into wood after centuries of Louisiana humidity. Business had brought me here, A conference on historical preservation that seemed ironically fitting given my accommodations. I'd chosen this hotel specifically for its authenticity, passing over the sterile chains near the convention center. Now, standing in the amber light filtering through aged lace curtains, I wondered if I'd been too romantic in my selection. I knocked twice on the door frame, a habit from childhood, testing the solidity of new spaces. The wood gave back its expected hollow response. Then, after a pause of perhaps 3 seconds, came a third knock. Lighter, almost tentative, from somewhere deeper in the room. My hand was still raised from my own knocking. I lowered it slowly, listening. Old buildings settle. Pipes, knock. These were facts I knew intellectually, yet the timing had been too perfect, too deliberate. The knock had possessed intention. I repeated the experiment on the wall beside the bed. 2 firm raps with my knuckles. The pause stretched longer this time. 5 seconds, maybe 6, before the answer came. 3 soft taps, not from the wall I'd struck, but from the ceiling above, as if someone were kneeling in the attic and responding through the floorboards. The rational part of my mind, the part that had earned a doctorate in architectural history, cataloged explanations. Water pipes, thermal expansion, a guest in the room above matching my rhythm by coincidence. But my body knew better. The fine hairs on my forearms stood at attention, and my breathing had gone shallow without my permission. Testing further, I asked aloud, "Is it going to rain tonight?" The floorboards beneath the Persian rug creaked in a pattern. Long, short, short. Then again, long, short, short. A pause. Long, long. Yes, number. I laughed. A sharp bark that sounded wrong in the dense air. This was absurd. I was creating patterns from random noise, the same psychological trick that makes us see faces in clouds. Yet when I said, "Stop this," the curtains beside the French doors billowed inward despite the doors being closed, despite the absence of any draft I could feel. They swelled like a sail catching wind, held for a moment in an impossible curve, then deflated with what I could only describe as reluctance. The room fell silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that has weight and presence, that makes you aware of your own heartbeat thundering in your ears. I stood frozen in the center of the room, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had descended. A business card on the nightstand caught my eye. The hotel's, with a handwritten note. "We hope you enjoy your stay in our most requested room." Most requested. The phrase lodged in my mind like a splinter. I needed air. I fumbled with the French door's lock, a complicated mechanism that required pressing down while turning, and stepped onto the balcony. Royal Street stretched below, tourists wandering between antique shops and galleries. The normalcy of it should have been comforting, but the contrast only heightened my unease. Up here, separated by just a few feet of elevation, I existed in a different world entirely. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet that looked almost diseased. I gripped the wrought iron railing and tried to steady my breathing. Behind me, through the open doors, I heard it, a whisper of movement, like someone turning over in bed. I spun around. The room appeared unchanged, but the quality of light had shifted. Shadows pooled in corners where shadows shouldn't be. The mosquito netting around the bed swayed despite the stillness of the air. Back inside, I closed and locked the French doors. The brass key was original, its teeth worn but functional. I pocketed it, then thought better and placed it on the dresser. If I needed to leave quickly, I didn't want to be fumbling in my pockets. My phone showed 3 missed calls from my ex-wife. I'd forgotten to tell her I'd arrived safely, a courtesy we still extended despite the divorce. I called her back, needing the anchor of a familiar voice. She answered on the second ring, her tone immediately concerned. "You sound strange. Are you all right?" I almost told her about the room, about the knocks and creaks, but the words died in my throat. How could I explain that I, a rational man who'd spent his career studying the bones of old buildings, was being undone by settling timber and imagination? We talked about nothing. Her sister's new job, the weather back home. until the normalcy of conversation made the room's strangeness feel manageable. When we hung up, the silence rushed back like water through a breach. I decided to go out for dinner, anything to avoid being alone with whatever inhabited this space. But when I tried to leave, the door wouldn't budge. The deadbolt was unlocked. The handle turned freely, but the door itself seemed sealed to its frame. I pulled harder, then harder still, until I was yanking with my full weight. Nothing. Panic rose in my chest like bile. I grabbed my phone to call the front desk, but there was no signal. The Wi-Fi had disconnected. I was cut off. Then, as suddenly as it had stuck, the door swung open with such ease, I nearly fell backward. A couple passing in the hallway gave me a strange look, and I forced a smile, muttering something about old hardware. But I couldn't bring myself to leave. Walking away felt like abandoning a conversation mid-sentence, like rudeness to something that had shown itself to me, however obliquely. I closed the door and leaned against it, my academic curiosity warring with primitive fear. The room had gone dark while I'd struggled with the door. I flicked the switch for the overhead light, a converted gas fixture, but only the bedside lamp responded, casting a yellow circle that made the darkness beyond its reach seem denser. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sagging with the accumulated impressions of countless bodies. How many people had slept here? How many had experienced what I was experiencing? The thought that I might not be unique in this, might be part of a pattern stretching back decades, was somehow both comforting and horrifying. My laptop was in my suitcase. I could work, lose myself in the conference presentation I needed to review. But when I opened the case, a smell wafted up that stopped me cold. Flowers. Not the generic floral of cleaning products, but specific, gardenias, heavy and funeral. The same scent that had pulled me from sleep that morning, though there had been no flowers in the lobby, no potpourri in the halls. I lifted out my laptop, and beneath it lay a piece of paper I didn't remember packing. Hotel stationery, yellowed at the edges. In handwriting that wasn't mine. The window likes to be open at night. My hands trembled as I set the paper aside. I'd packed that suitcase myself. I'd gone through airport security. No one else had touched it. The impossibility of the note's presence made my chest tight. I stood and paced the room, trying to think clearly. Carbon monoxide? A gas leak causing hallucinations? But I felt lucid, alert. Too alert, perhaps, my senses sharpened to an uncomfortable degree. I could hear conversations from the street below, the hum of the air conditioning unit 3 rooms down, my own blood pulsing in my temples. The curtains moved again. This time I saw it clearly. They didn't billow with wind, but seemed to be pulled from within the fabric itself, as if hands were pressing against them from inside the weave. The movement was deliberate, almost beckoning. I approached slowly. My reflection in the dark glass of the French doors showed a man I barely recognized, wild-eyed, shoulders hunched, moving with the careful steps of someone navigating a minefield. Behind my reflection, the room stretched impossibly deep, the walls seeming to extend beyond their physical boundaries. My hand reached for the door handle without my conscious decision. The brass was ice cold despite the warm evening. I pressed down and turned, just as I had before. But this time the mechanism felt different, smoother, as if recently oiled. The doors swung open on silent hinges. The balcony had changed. Where before there had been tourists and evening light, now Royal Street lay empty under a moon that shouldn't be full but was. The buildings across the way were dark, their windows reflecting nothing. The air smelled of river mud and age. I stepped out, and the boards beneath my feet gave slightly, spongy with rot that hadn't been there an hour ago. The railing I gripped flaked rust onto my palms. Time had accelerated out here, or perhaps I'd stepped into a different one entirely. A sound made me turn, scratching, like someone writing. On the French door's glass, condensation had formed despite the warm night. In it, words appeared as if drawn by an invisible finger. "You weren't supposed to lock us out." I backed against the railing, which groaned under my weight. The words remained for a moment, then new ones formed. "We've been waiting so long. Who are you?" My voice came out as a whisper. The condensation cleared and reformed. The ones who stayed. My mind reeled. Stayed? In the room? In the hotel? In some state between? I thought of all the hands that had touched these doorknobs, all the bodies that had pressed against these walls. Were they all here somehow, accumulated like sediment in the spaces between molecules? The scratching intensified, and more words appeared, overlapping now, different handwritings fighting for space on the glass. Let us in. Open the window. We're cold. Please. So tired. Open. 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 I stumbled backward through the doors, slamming them shut. My hands fumbled with the lock, but it wouldn't catch. The mechanism that had worked perfectly before now spun freely, refusing to engage. The scratching continued, but now it came from inside the walls. Not just one spot, but dozens, hundreds maybe, like fingernails on wood, traveling through the infrastructure of the building. The wallpaper began to bubble and lift in places, as if hands were pushing from behind. I grabbed my suitcase, not bothering to pack, and ran for the door. This time it opened immediately, eagerly, as if the room wanted me gone. I burst into the hallway, startling a housekeeper pushing a cart of linens. She looked at me with concern. "Sir, is everything all right?" I must have looked deranged, sweat-soaked, wild-eyed, clutching my suitcase like a life preserver. "The room," I managed. "There's something wrong with the room." Her expression shifted from concern to something else. Recognition, perhaps, or resignation. "Room 237? I nodded. She sighed and pulled out a radio. "We need management at 237. Yes, again." Within minutes, the night manager appeared, a thin man with the tired eyes of someone who'd had this conversation before. He didn't seem surprised when I demanded a different room, didn't argue when I refused to go back for my belongings still inside. As he led me to another wing of the hotel, he spoke quietly. "That room has personality. Some guests find it charming. Others," he trailed off, "will have maintenance retrieve your belongings in the morning." "Has anyone else?" I began, but he cut me off. "The hotel has stood for over 150 years, sir. Many things have happened in these rooms. Many guests have stayed, some for longer than others." He handed me a new key, this one modern, electronic. "Your new room has been recently renovated. You'll find it much quieter." That night, in a sterile room with sealed windows and central air, I lay awake wondering. Had I experienced a genuine haunting? A breakdown? Some elaborate hoax designed to give the hotel character? The scratching, the words, the impossible note. All of it felt both absolutely real and completely impossible. In the morning, my belongings were waiting outside my door. Everything was there, neatly repacked, except for one thing. The note about the window was gone. In its place was a new piece of paper, modern hotel stationery, with a single line in handwriting I recognized as my own, though I had no memory of writing it. "Next time, leave the window open." I checked out immediately, abandoning the conference, driving home in a single 14-hour stretch. But even now, weeks later, I find myself thinking about room 237, about the scratching in the walls and the words on the glass, about who or what wanted in, or perhaps more unsettling, what had wanted out. Sometimes, late at night, I hear knocking in my own walls. 2 taps, followed by a pause, then a third, lighter knock. I tell myself it's the pipes, the settling foundation, the rational explanations I know so well. But I've started leaving my windows cracked at night just in case, because the truth I can't escape is this. I don't know what happened in that room. I can't prove any of it was real, can't prove it wasn't. I exist now in a space between certainties, where the walls between possible and impossible have gone soft and permeable. And sometimes when the night is very quiet, I swear I can smell gardenias. Story 11. The morning mist clung to the lodgepole pines like something alive, writhing between the trunks as I made my way deeper into the backcountry of Yellowstone. I'd been hiking these trails for 15 years, but that September morning felt different from the moment I left the parking area at dawn. The usual symphony of birds had fallen silent, replaced by a thick quietness that made my own breathing sound obscenely loud. I was 3 miles in when I first heard it. A whistle, clear and precise, cutting through the morning air. It was the exact 2-note call I use for my border collie back home, the one I'd perfected over years of training. My hand instinctively went to my bear spray, though something told me this wasn't about bears. The whistle came again, identical in pitch and duration, but from somewhere ahead where the trail curved around a massive boulder. I stopped, listening. No footsteps, no rustling of underbrush, no voices. Just that whistle, my whistle, hanging in the air like a question. I called out a greeting, the standard hiker's courtesy. The forest swallowed my voice without an echo. But then, impossibly, the whistle responded. This time from my left, where no trail existed, just dense forest and a steep slope covered in deadfall. My boots crunched on the volcanic soil as I continued forward, every nerve ending alert. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the canopy, and shadows pooled in the spaces between trees like dark water. That's when I noticed the prints. They appeared in a patch of pale mud beside the trail, the kind that forms where mineral-rich water seeps up from the thermal features below. Boot prints, clearly defined, matching my stride length exactly. But the size was wrong. Just slightly larger than my size 11s, maybe by a centimeter, no more. Fresh enough that moisture still glistened in the deepest impressions. I placed my boot next to one of the prints for comparison. Close, but definitely not mine. Someone with similar boots, similar gait, but bigger feet. The prints led off trail, heading into the trees where the whistle had come from. Against every principle of backcountry safety, I followed them. The forest seemed to compress around me as I left the trail. Pine needles muffled my steps, and the air grew thick with the scent of earth and something else. Something metallic and wrong, like copper pennies left in the rain. The prints continued, weaving between trees with a purposefulness that suggested intimate knowledge of the terrain. 20 yards in, they simply stopped. Not at a rock or a stream or any natural barrier. They just ended, mid-stride, as if whoever made them had lifted straight up into the canopy. I looked up, half expecting to see someone perched in the branches, but found only interlocking pine boughs and patches of gray sky. The whistle came again, behind me now, back toward the trail. My whistle, note perfect, but with something else layered underneath, a subsonic vibration that made my teeth ache. I crashed back through the underbrush, branches catching at my jacket, my breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with exertion. The trail appeared like salvation, familiar and solid under the filtered sunlight. I stood there for a moment, hands on my knees, trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. Another hiker, obviously. Someone who'd heard me whistle earlier, though I couldn't remember whistling, and was playing some kind of game. I continued on, forcing myself to maintain a normal pace. The trail wound through a section of younger forest, regenerated from the '88 fires, where the trees stood thin and pale like bones. Here the morning sun finally broke through, casting everything in sharp relief. That's when I spoke my name aloud, a habit from solo hiking, a way to break the oppressive silence and remind myself I was real, present, alive. The word left my mouth and traveled out into the forest. 2 syllables, familiar as breathing. The echo that returned had 3. It wasn't quite my name anymore, but my name with something attached, an extra sound that transformed it into something else, something that meant being called rather than calling. The additional syllable hung in the air like a claim, a possession, a summoning. I stopped walking. The forest held its breath. Even the ever-present whisper of wind through pine needles ceased. In that crystalline silence, I heard footsteps matching mine, except I wasn't moving. They continued for 3 more beats before stopping, somewhere behind me, maybe 50 feet back. I turned, scanning the trail. Empty. A Clark's nutcracker watched me from a dead snag, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. The next mile passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I made myself notice things: the flash of a mountain bluebird, the distant rumble of a thermal feature, the way the trail dust coated my boots. Anything to avoid acknowledging the sensation that pressed against my back like a physical presence. The feeling of being not just watched, but studied, cataloged, known. The first stake appeared at a trail junction I'd passed 100 times before. It jutted from the ground at a slight angle, weathered gray wood with numbers burned deep into its surface. My birth date, minus the final digit. Not the whole date, just the numbers. 0318198. The last digit, the one that would complete the year of my birth, simply wasn't there, as if it had never existed. I knelt beside it, running my fingers over the burned numbers. They were old, the charred edges worn smooth by seasons of snow and sun. This stake had been here for years, maybe decades, but I'd never seen it before. I was certain of that. You don't forget something like finding your almost birthday carved into wood in the middle of nowhere. I took a photo with my phone, needing evidence, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The image on the screen showed the stake clearly, the numbers stark against the gray wood. But in the background, barely visible in the photo's corner, was another stake I hadn't noticed, identical to the first, the same angle, the same weathering, the same numbers. I looked up. There was no second stake. I checked the phone again. There it was in the image, clear as the first. I took another photo from a different angle. This time, 3 stakes appeared in the frame, though my eyes saw only one. The whistle came again, so close it might have been my own lips pursing, my own breath expelled. But I wasn't whistling. I pressed my lips together hard enough to hurt, proving to myself they were still, silent. The trail back should have been familiar, comforting in its knownness. I'd deliberately chosen an out-and-back hike. No loops, no alternate routes, just forward and reverse on the same path. But the forest had rearranged itself in my absence. Trees stood where they shouldn't, leaning at angles that defied their earlier positions. The trail itself seemed wider in places, narrower in others, though the boot prints, mine from the morning, remained exactly where they should be. A fallen log I'd stepped over on the way out now required climbing over, its bulk somehow doubled. The stream crossing I'd rock-hopped was running higher, faster, though there'd been no rain for weeks. And the light was wrong, still morning light, though my watch insisted it was past noon. I found the second stake a quarter mile from where I'd seen the first. Or maybe it was the first stake in a new location. The numbers were identical, 0318198. The wood was the same weathered gray, but this time, there was something else. A thin cord tied around the top, the kind of paracord I carry in my pack. The exact shade of safety orange I always choose. I checked my pack. My paracord was there, untouched, still factory coiled. The third stake stood beside the second, though I swear it materialized while I was examining the cord. Same numbers, same weathering. But this one had something carved below the numbers. Initials that weren't quite mine, off by one letter, as if someone had tried to remember them and gotten close but not exactly right. The forest pressed in, the spaces between trees seeming to narrow with each breath. The whistle came from 3 directions at once, harmonizing with itself, creating a chord that made my bones resonate. I ran. There's a particular kind of terror that comes from running in the woods, the way branches become claws, roots become snares, shadows become pits. Every stride is a gamble between speed and safety. I ran anyway, crashing down the trail toward the parking area, toward my car, toward the normal world where whistles don't echo wrong and stakes don't multiply. The prints beside the trail kept pace with me. Not my morning prints, but fresh ones, appearing in every patch of soft earth, matching my current stride but still that centimeter larger. Sometimes they appeared ahead of me, already there when I arrived, as if anticipating my path. Sometimes they materialized behind me, visible in the corner of my eye, following or flanking or leading. I couldn't tell anymore. I stopped at a familiar landmark, a distinctive rock formation I'd photographed dozens of times. Except now there were two formations, identical twins where before there'd been a singular statement in stone. I looked at my old photos on my phone. One rock. I looked up. Two rocks. I looked at the phone again. The old photo now showed two rocks. It had always shown two rocks. My memory was lying, or the photo was lying, or the rocks were lying, and I didn't know which was worse. The whistle came from inside my own throat. I felt it build and emerge without my volition, the two notes perfect and clear. My lips hadn't moved. My throat had acted on its own, or something had acted through my throat, using my voice box like an instrument. I clapped my hand over my mouth, though it was already too late. The whistle had been released, sent out into the forest like a signal, a beacon, a surrender. And from every direction, from far and near, from above and below, the forest whistled back. Not an echo, not a mimicry, a chorus of identical whistles. My whistle reproduced 100 times, 1,000 times, until the air itself vibrated with that two-note call. The sound pressed against my eardrums, threatened to crawl inside my skull, to replace every thought with its simple, insistent pattern. I don't remember the last mile. I came to awareness in the parking area, sitting in my car with the engine running, my hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to leave marks. The sun was wrong. Too low, too orange, as if hours had passed and seconds or seconds had stretched into hours. I drove away from Yellowstone that day and haven't been back. But sometimes, in the early morning, I hear that whistle outside my window. My whistle, but not from my lips. And sometimes, I find stakes in my yard. Weathered gray wood with numbers burned deep, 0318198. Last week I found two stakes, side by side, identical. This morning I found three. The fourth appeared while I was writing this, visible through my window, standing at the exact angle of the ones in Yellowstone. The numbers are the same. The weathering is the same. But now, there's something else carved below the numbers. A date, just a few days from now, with one digit missing. I've started whistling in my sleep. My partner tells me it's the same two notes, over and over, perfect each time. But when they try to wake me, I don't stop. The whistling continues even as I speak, as if it's coming from somewhere else, somewhere inside me that I can't reach or control. The prints have started appearing in my house, larger than my feet by just that single centimeter, tracking mud that smells of sulfur and pine, leading from my bedroom door to my bed, from my bed to the window, from the window to nowhere, just ending mid-stride, as if the walker lifted away. I've stopped looking at old photos. They keep changing, showing stakes that weren't there, shadows that don't match, and sometimes, in the background, a figure that's almost me, but not quite, standing just that little bit taller, watching from between the trees. The whistle comes from the walls now, from the pipes, from the spaces between breaths. It's teaching me something, or calling something, or becoming something. I don't know which. I only know that tomorrow I'll find another stake. And the day after, two more. They're counting towards something, marking time until that incomplete date arrives. And when it does, when that final digit reveals itself or doesn't, when the pattern completes or refuses to complete, I'll understand what heard me in Yellowstone, what followed me home, what's been standing just that centimeter outside of being me. The whistle is coming from this page now, from these words, from your reading. Can you hear it? That two-note call, perfect and clear? Of course you can. You've always been able to hear it. It's your whistle too, after all. Just a centimeter different from mine. Story 12. The night shift at the Seattle port has its own rhythm. The distant groan of cranes, the hiss of hydraulics, the occasional shout carried on salt wind. But that Tuesday in November, something was different. The air felt heavier, pressing against my eardrums like we were descending underwater. I'd been working security for 3 years, long enough to know which containers had been sitting unused since before I started. The blue one in Section K had been there so long, its paint had faded to the color of old jeans, rust bleeding through in patterns that looked almost deliberate. That night, as I made my rounds near midnight, I heard it breathing, not metaphorically. The sound was unmistakable, a deep, rhythmic wheeze, like massive lungs filling and emptying. I stopped, flashlight beam cutting through the mist rolling off Puget Sound. The container expanded slightly with each inhale, metal groaning, then contracted with a soft sigh. The gaps between breaths were perfectly timed, about 12 seconds apart. I counted them, standing there in the dark with my hand on my radio, unable to move. When I finally approached, the condensation on the metal felt wrong, too warm, too thick. I pressed my ear against the corrugated surface, and beneath the breathing, I heard water dripping steadily inside. Yet the concrete around the container was bone dry, not even the usual puddles from Seattle's perpetual drizzle. That's when the handprints appeared. They materialized from inside, wet palms pressing against the metal, fingers splayed, one after another, sliding downward, leaving trails of moisture that caught my flashlight beam. The container's identification numbers, SEAU 4493827, began to blur as condensation spread across them like frost on a window. But from within, the digits became unreadable, as if someone inside was deliberately obscuring them with their breath, their touch, their presence. I radioed for backup. The response came back garbled, static, eating the words. When I tried again, my radio died completely. My phone showed no signal, though I'd had full bars moments before. The breathing quickened. I ran. Not walked, not jogged. Ran like I hadn't since high school, my steel-toed boots hammering the asphalt. I found the shift supervisor in the main office, trying to explain what I'd seen, while he looked at me with that expression people get when they think you're either lying or losing it. But he came with me. We both did. The container was silent when we returned. No breathing, no handprints. Nothing but old blue paint and rust. Except now there was a new padlock on the doors, bright steel against the weathered latch with a white tag that read simply, "Do not open." The supervisor examined it, frowning. Nobody had logged installing a new lock. Security footage from that sector showed nothing but static for the past hour. He made some calls, but no one knew anything about it. The lock had no key code, no manifest number, nothing that connected it to Port Authority. He told me to forget about it. Shit happens at ports, he said. Containers get mixed up, paperwork gets lost. But I saw the way he avoided looking at the blue container, how he picked up his pace walking past it. My badge started failing the next day. Not everywhere, just near Section K. The reader would beep, flash red, and I'd have to call someone to let me through. IT replaced it twice. Same problem. They couldn't explain it. I changed my routes, avoiding that section when possible. But the port's not that big, and eventually you have to pass through. Each time I did, things got worse. The condensation spread to other containers nearby, always from the inside out. Security cameras in that section developed chronic malfunctions. Not static, but distortions that looked almost like faces pressed against glass. Other guards mentioned hearing things. Not breathing exactly, but whispers that might have been wind, or metal settling, or something else. Then people started disappearing. Not dramatically, they just stopped showing up for shifts. When I asked around, I got different stories. Family emergency, better job offer, moved out of state. But their lockers were still full. Their cars still in the employee lot for days before someone finally had them towed. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything. The breathing got louder each time I passed, though no one else seemed to hear it. The handprints appeared in different patterns, sometimes child-sized, sometimes too large to be human. Once, I saw them arranged in words, but the condensation blurred them before I could read the message. 3 weeks after that first night, I made a mistake. I touched the container. It was involuntary. I'd tripped over a cable, put my hand out to steady myself. The metal was body temperature warm and slightly soft like skin. When I pulled away, my palm was wet with something that wasn't quite water. Under the security lights, it had an oily, prismatic sheen. That night, The dream started. I was inside the container, but it wasn't empty. The walls were lined with photographs, thousands of them, all showing the same person from different angles and distances. It took me several moments to realize they were all pictures of me, at work, at home, shopping, sleeping, recent photos, old photos, photos from my childhood that should have been impossible. In each one, there was something in the background, a dark shape just out of focus, getting closer in each successive image. I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked with the same oily moisture from the container. It wouldn't wash off. Soap, alcohol, even industrial degreaser, nothing worked. The stuff just absorbed into my skin, leaving a faint, iridescent mark like a bruise that shifted colors in different light. The next shift, I found out I wasn't the only one. 3 other guards had the same marks. We didn't talk about it directly, but I saw them rubbing their palms, saw the way they looked at each other. One quit that night. Another transferred to day shift. The third stopped coming to work entirely. And when I drove by his apartment, the windows were covered with aluminum foil. I should have quit too. But something kept pulling me back. Maybe it was the need to understand. Or maybe it was something else. The mark on my palm would throb when I stayed away too long. A deep ache that reminded me of the container's breathing rhythm. I started researching the container's history. CIU 4493827 didn't exist in any shipping database. The SEAU prefix wasn't used by any company operating out of Seattle. But I found something else. Newspaper archives from 1987 mentioning a container with those exact numbers, discovered floating in the Sound with no ship to claim it. It had been brought to port, inspected, and found empty except for condensation on the walls. They'd tried to scrap it, but the metal wouldn't cut. Torches died, saw blades shattered. Eventually, they just left it there. The article stopped after a few weeks, but I found a forums post from 2003. A former dock worker claimed the container collected people. Not physically, but something else. He wrote about the marks, the dreams, the gradual feeling that you were being hollowed out from inside. His last post said he was going to open it, to finally see what was inside. His account went dark after that. I tracked down his name in public records. He was alive, technically. Committed to Western State Hospital in 2004, catatonic. The admission notes mentioned he'd been found at the port, standing in front of an old blue container, completely unresponsive. He hadn't moved or spoken since. Last night, something changed. The breathing wasn't coming from the container anymore. It was coming from me. The same rhythm, the same 12-second intervals. I can feel my chest expanding beyond what should be possible, my ribs creaking like metal under pressure. The mark on my palm has spread up my arm, following my veins like a map. In certain lights, I can see through my skin to something underneath that isn't muscle or bone. It looks like photographs, thousands of them, layered beneath the surface, all showing different versions of myself I don't remember being. My badge doesn't fail anymore near Section K. If anything, it works too well. Doors I shouldn't have access to open automatically. Security systems recognize me as having clearances I've never had. The port's computer system lists me as employee number 4,493,827. I went back to the container tonight. The lock was gone, replaced by a small brass plaque. Authorized personnel only. My handprint was already on the door, etched into the metal like it had always been there. The breathing had stopped because it was waiting for me to open it, waiting for me to see what's inside, or maybe waiting for me to realize what's been inside all along. The door is cold under my palm now, but familiar, like coming home. I can hear whispers from within, not voices exactly, but the sound thoughts make before they become words. They're saying my name, except it's not my name anymore. It's a number, it's a coordinate. It's a place between sleeping and waking where the metal breathes and the photographs develop themselves in the dark. I'm going to open it. Not because I want to, but because I already have. Time works differently near the container. Past and future blur like condensation on metal. I've always been opening it. I've never stopped opening it. Each time I think it's the first time, But the photographs inside tell a different story. The other guards avoid me now. They see something in my eyes that reflects the overhead lights wrong. Sometimes I catch myself in mirrors and don't recognize the face looking back. It's mine, but older, or younger, or just slightly out of phase, like two images poorly overlapped. My supervisor called me into his office yesterday. Said they were concerned about me, that I should take some time off. But when I looked at his desk, I saw my file. Except it went back decades before I was hired. Photos of me from the 70s, the 50s, dates that made no sense. All at the port, all near Section K. All with the same expression I'm wearing now. He pretended not to notice when I pointed it out. Just kept talking about mental health resources, about stress, about benefits I don't remember signing up for. His hand shook when he signed my leave papers. The signature wasn't his, it was mine. I'm standing in front of the container now as I write this final entry. My phone says it's Tuesday, November 15th, but my watch says it's November 3rd, and the calendar on the office wall showed October when I passed it. Time is breathing in and out, expanding and contracting like metal under impossible pressure. The door is already open, though I haven't touched it yet. Inside, I can see myself writing this, standing in front of the container. Inside that version, another me, and another, recursing inward like a tunnel of mirrors. Each one thinks they're the real one. Each one is about to open the door. The photographs on the walls aren't pictures anymore. They're windows. Each one shows a different moment of someone discovering the container, touching it, being marked by it. We're all here, suspended in the space between breathing in and breathing out. The dock worker from 2003, the crew from 1987, others from times that haven't happened yet or happened too long ago to remember. We're not trapped. That's the horrible thing I'm starting to understand. We're not trapped because we are the container now. Every time someone new touches it, we expand. Every time someone dreams of it, we breathe. Every time someone tries to forget it, we condense on the walls of their memory like moisture from somewhere that shouldn't exist. I can feel you reading this. Yes, you. The one who found this account, this story, this warning that isn't a warning because it's already too late. You've been marked just by knowing. Check your palm. See that faint discoloration? That's how it starts. The container is breathing because we're breathing. The container is waiting because we're waiting. The container is empty because we're what fills it. My badge works everywhere now. All the doors open for me, but they all lead to the same place, back to Section K, back to the blue paint and rust, back to the breathing that matches my own. I'm going to step inside now, or I already have, or I never stopped stepping inside. Caught in a loop that started before the container arrived and won't end when it's gone. Because it's never really gone. It just appears somewhere else, someone else, waiting for the next person to hear it breathe, to feel drawn to its warmth, to leave their handprints on the inside of something that shouldn't exist. If you work at a port, any port, and you see an old blue container with no proper markings, don't listen for the breathing. Don't touch the condensation. Don't read the numbers that won't stay still. But you will. We all do. We all have. We all are going to. The metal is soft as skin now, warm as blood. I'm home. We're home. Welcome. Story 13. The desert wind carried something wrong that night. Not just dust and heat, but a metallic taste that coated the back of my throat like old pennies left in water. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight through the Southwest, chasing a story about abandoned infrastructure for a magazine piece nobody would probably read. The GPS had gone silent an hour ago, its blue light pulsing like a dying heart against the dashboard. That's when I saw it. A border checkpoint station between two states, its concrete booth rising from the darkness like a forgotten monument. No signs, no lights, just a structure that shouldn't have been there according to any map I'd studied. My headlights swept across faded yellow paint and rusted barriers frozen mid-lift, as if time had simply stopped caring about this place. I pulled over. journalist's curiosity overriding the crawling sensation at the base of my skull that whispered, "Keep driving." The engine ticked its cooling symphony as I stepped out into air so thick it felt like breathing through wet cotton. The booth's door hung open at an angle that hurt to look at directly, neither fully open nor closed, existing in some impossible middle state. Inside, everything waited in perfect decay. Papers yellowed like autumn leaves covered the desk, their edges curled with age, but the text still sharp, still readable. Border crossing permits dated 1987, but the watermarks shifted when I wasn't looking directly at them, showing dates that hadn't happened yet. A row of rubber stamps stood at attention, their handles worn smooth by hands that had long since stopped existing. I picked up one of the forms, its texture both brittle and somehow damp. The heading read, Interstate Transit Documentation, but the states listed weren't quite right. The abbreviations were off by a letter here, a letter there, creating places that almost existed. For reasons I still can't explain, I reached for one of the stamps. The sound came before contact, a sharp crack like breaking bone. My hand was still inches away, but the paper already bore the mark. Tomorrow's date in ink so fresh I could smell the chemicals. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. I glanced at my watch, 11:23 p.m. The stamp felt cold in my hand, colder than the desert night should allow, and when I set it down, frost patterns spiderwebbed across the metal base. Back in the car, the GPS flickered to life with a cheerful ding that made me flinch. The speed indicator showed negative 15 miles per hour while I sat perfectly still. Then negative 20, negative 25. The numbers descended even as I shifted into drive and pressed the accelerator. For several hundred feet, the speedometer insisted I was traveling backward through space while moving forward through time, or perhaps the opposite. The distinction had begun to blur. The sun visor dropped without warning. A receipt fluttered down like a dying moth, landing on my lap with the weight of lead. My name stared back at me in handwriting that was mine but wasn't, the way I might write if my hand belonged to someone else. The paper felt older than the booth, older than the desert, with edges soft as skin. Under services rendered, someone had written, "Passage between." The entry/exit field remained stubbornly blank, a void that seemed to pull at my vision. The radio crackled. I hadn't turned it on. Static resolved into voices speaking backward, or maybe inside out, words that my ears recognized but my brain refused to process. Among the chaos, I heard my own voice clearly. Should have kept driving. But I hadn't spoken. My mouth was dry as sand, lips cracked and bleeding though they'd been fine moments ago. The road ahead looked wrong, not damaged or different, just wrong in a way that made my teeth ache. The yellow lines pulsed with their own light, sometimes single, sometimes double, sometimes patterns that hurt to count. My headlights illuminated things that shouldn't have been there. A mailbox standing alone in the desert, a street sign for roads that don't exist, a payphone with the receiver dangling, swaying without wind. In the rearview mirror, the booth still stood, but now lights blazed from within. A figure sat at the desk, stamping papers with mechanical precision. The sound reached me even through the closed windows in growing distance. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Each impact arriving before the arm moved, effect preceding cause in a rhythm that made my nose bleed. I drove faster, but the speedometer now showed impossible numbers. Infinity, negative infinity, symbols I didn't recognize. The fuel gauge spun like a compass near a magnet. The odometer ran backward, erasing miles I'd already traveled, undriving my entire journey. According to the dashboard, I'd never left home. According to the dashboard, I was still there. According to the dashboard, I was already at my destination, had been there for years. The receipt on my lap had changed. Now it showed an itemized list. Memory adjustment, $0. Temporal realignment, $0. Identity verification, pending return passage, denied my phone. When had I taken it out? Showed 17 missed calls from my own number. The voicemails were my voice, each one older than the last, warning me about things that hadn't happened yet, or had happened and I'd forgotten, or were happening right now in a place I wasn't quite occupying. The last message was just breathing, but breathing in a pattern I recognized as my own sleep rhythm. I was listening to myself sleep while awake, or awake while sleeping, the boundary as fluid as the desert air. Mile markers passed in wrong order: 97, 45, 112, 3. Towns appeared on signs that I knew didn't exist, couldn't exist. But I remembered visiting them as a child. I remembered their diners with the best pie, their gas stations with the cleanest restrooms, their motels where I'd stayed with someone whose face I couldn't quite recall, but whose absence felt like a missing tooth. The radio found a station, a clear signal in the static desert. The DJ's voice was professional, warm, discussing tomorrow's weather in the past tense, yesterday's news in future conditional. He mentioned a writer who'd gone missing on a desert highway, described my car, my route, my last known location as the booth I'd just left, or was about to reach, or had never found. Then he said my name, but it came out wrong, syllables reversed or inside out, a name that was mine, but belonged to someone who'd made different choices, taken different roads. He read my obituary in present tense, describing my ongoing death as a current event, details specific and wrong and absolutely true. The cause was listed as failure to maintain consistent temporal position. The date was tomorrow, yesterday, now. The booth appeared ahead again, or still, or for the first time. The same booth but different, older and newer simultaneously, existing in multiple states of decay. The figure at the desk was clearer now, uniform crisp but rotting, face both young and ancient, hands moving at speeds that shouldn't be possible, stamping documents that flew up and disappeared into a sky that had too many stars, or not enough, or stars in patterns that spelled words, in languages that predated speech. I stopped the car. Had to. The engine was running backward anyway, pistons pulling instead of pushing, combustion becoming combination, entropy reversing in a localized pocket that made my skin feel like it was trying to crawl away from my bones. The receipt in my hand, when had I picked it up again, now showed a simple message. Thank you for your patience. Your crossing has been processed. But processed to where? From where? The entry/exit field remained blank, would always remain blank, because I hadn't entered or exited. I was in the between, had always been in the between, would always be in the between. The booth was a membrane, and I'd passed through it without passing through it, existed on both sides simultaneously. Neither here nor there, but somehow exactly where I was supposed to be. The attendant looked up. I could see them clearly now through my windshield, through the booth's glass, through time and space and possibility. Their face was mine, would be mine, had been mine, reflecting infinite versions of a choice I hadn't made yet, or had already made, or was making constantly in the eternal present that stretched like taffy between 2 points that were the same point. They held up a stamp, my hand holding it, their hand holding it, our hand holding it. The sound came before the motion again, thunk, and my forehead burned with cold fire. I touched the spot and my fingers came away with ink that wasn't there, marking me with tomorrow's date, yesterday's date, every date and no date, a temporal brand that meant I'd been processed but never specified for what. The radio static formed words: border crossing successful, please proceed to your destination. But the GPS showed no destination, no origin, just a blinking dot suspended between coordinates that didn't exist. The speedometer read 0 and infinity simultaneously. The fuel tank was empty and full. The engine was running and off. I drove anyway, or stayed still while the road moved beneath me, or both, or neither. The desert stretched infinite in all directions, punctuated by the booth that appeared every few miles or every few seconds, or never, or always. Each time with the same figure, the same stamps, the same papers yellowing into futures that had already become pasts. My phone rang. My number. I answered and heard myself asking a question I hadn't thought to ask. Which side of the border are you on? I couldn't answer because I didn't know, would never know, had always known. The crossing wasn't between states or countries or territories. It was between states of being, and I'd been processed for a transition I couldn't understand, approved for a journey that had no destination, no origin, just the eternal middle space where borders exist not to separate, but to suspend. The receipt changed one last time. Under entry/exit, finally a single word appeared. Pending. It would always be pending. I would always be crossing. The booth would always be there, waiting for travelers who didn't know they were traveling, processing documents for journeys that existed perpendicular to normal space. The attendant would always be stamping papers with tomorrow's date, creating futures that became pasts before they could become presents. I drive still or think I do. The speedometer can't decide. The radio plays news from when that haven't happened in places that don't exist. The GPS guides me nowhere with perfect precision, and sometimes, in the rearview mirror that shows things that aren't behind me, I see other cars stopped at the booth, their drivers receiving receipts with their names in handwriting they almost recognize, beginning journeys they've already completed, completing journeys they'll never begin. The border crossing is successful. The border crossing is pending. The border crossing never happened. The border crossing is all that ever happened. I reach for the receipt again, but it's already in my hand, has always been in my hand, will always be in my hand. My name shifts on the paper, letters rearranging into something almost familiar, almost foreign. The entry/exit field flickers between states. Blank, pending, approved, denied, all of them, none of them. The desert wind still carries that metallic taste, stronger now, or weaker, or exactly the same as it's always been. Time moves forward and backward and sideways, and I move with it, or against it, or through it, processed for a crossing that processes me, stamped with dates that mark nothing and everything. Somewhere, in a booth that exists in the spaces between map coordinates, an attendant that is and isn't me continues stamping papers. The sound echoes across possibilities, thunk, 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 marking travelers who don't know they're traveling, approving passages that lead nowhere and everywhere, creating borders that exist only to be crossed by those who never quite cross them. The receipt burns cold in my hand. Tomorrow's date. Yesterday's date. No date. All dates. Entry/exit. Pending. Always pending. Forever pending. I drive on through the desert that is and isn't there, toward a destination that doesn't exist, from an origin I never left, carrying proof of a crossing that happened and didn't happen, processed and unprocessed, here and there and nowhere, suspended in the eternal administration of a border that only exists for those who accidentally find it and can never be unfound once discovered. The radio crackles one last message in my own voice, speaking words I haven't said yet, or said long ago, or am saying right now in a place I'm not. Some borders aren't meant to be crossed. They're meant to be entered and never exited, processing travelers for journeys that never end, never begin, just exist in the space between what was and what might be. I want to turn back, but back has become forward. The booth waits in every direction, patient and eternal, its stamps ready to mark more travelers with impossible dates, its papers ready to document crossings that violate the basic laws of causality. The speedometer spins wildly one final time before settling on a symbol I don't recognize, a number that exists between numbers, a speed that isn't movement, but isn't stillness. The engine sound reverses and forward plays simultaneously, creating harmonics that make my teeth ache and my bones sing. I am crossing. I have crossed. I will cross. I never cross. The border processes me as I process the border, both of us caught in an administrative loop that someone forgot to close, or opened too wide, or designed exactly this way for purposes that predate purpose. And somewhere, in a reality I can almost remember, almost forget, a journalist drives through the desert looking for a story about abandoned infrastructure. He should have kept driving. I should have kept driving. We should have kept driving. But the story found us first, wrote itself into our path, stamped us with its truth that isn't true, its fiction that isn't false, its border that isn't a border but a process, endless, recursive, pending, always pending. Story 14. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. when I finally pulled into the Desert Vista Motel, 40 miles from anywhere that mattered on US 93. My eyes burned from 12 hours of Nevada highway, that particular brand of exhaustion where the yellow lines start to blur, and every shadow looks like something darting across the road. The neon sign flickered between vacancy and vacancy, casting intermittent red light across an empty parking lot that could have held 50 cars but sheltered only 3, including mine now. The lobby smelled of cigarette smoke that had been marinating in the walls since the 70s, mixed with something chemical, maybe pine sol, maybe something else trying to mask decay. Behind bulletproof glass that seemed excessive for a place this forgotten, the night clerk looked up from a portable television playing static-riddled infomercials. His face had that waxy quality of someone who'd been working nights too long, skin translucent under fluorescent tubes that hummed like trapped insects. I slid my credit card through the metal tray. He barely glanced at it before pushing a key across. An actual key, brass with a diamond-shaped plastic tag reading 17. "Second floor," he mumbled, eyes already drifting back to his screen. "Ice machine's broken. Checkout's at 11. I grabbed my overnight bag from the trunk, noticing how the desert cold had already started creeping in. That particular dry chill that makes your bones ache. The exterior stairs groaned under my weight, paint flaking off the railing in sheets. From the landing, I counted the doors stretching down the concrete walkway. 16 doors, evenly spaced, each with a small window beside it covered by yellowed curtains. The numbers went sequentially, 11, 12, 13, up to 16 at the far end. But my key said 17. I walked the length of the balcony twice, thinking maybe I'd miscounted. Maybe the numbers weren't sequential. Maybe exhaustion was making me stupid. 16 doors. No more. The building ended at room 16, a definitive corner where the walkway met a stucco wall. I leaned over the railing, looking down at the parking lot, then up at the roofline. The motel was a perfect rectangle. There was nowhere for another room to exist. Yet when I turned back, key heavy in my hand, there it was. Room 17 sat between 15 and 16, where seconds before had been only a stretch of wall. Not squeezed in. There was no sense of compression, no impossible geometry. The other rooms hadn't moved or shrunk. Room 17 simply existed in space that hadn't been there, as if the building had exhaled and revealed what had always been hidden in its lungs. The door looked newer than the others. The paint was fresh, deep brown without a single chip or weather stain. The window beside it had clean white curtains, not the nicotine yellow of its neighbors. Even the concrete in front of the door looked recently poured, slightly darker than the weathered walkway. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, key in hand, watching that door. Part of me wanted to go back downstairs, demand a different room. Hell, drive another 40 miles to the next motel. But exhaustion creates its own logic. I'd paid for a room. I had a key. The door was right there. The key turned smoothly, no resistance, no grinding of old tumblers. The door opened on silent hinges. Inside, everything was wrong in its rightness. While the rest of the motel screamed 1970s decline, room 17 looked like it had been renovated yesterday. Crisp white walls without a single scuff mark, a bed with hospital-tight corners, and sheets that smelled of industrial bleach. The carpet was that particular shade of beige that exists nowhere in nature, pristine and somehow depthless, as if my feet might sink through if I stepped wrong. The bathroom tiles gleamed under LED strips that were too bright, too white, making my reflection in the mirror look washed out, almost transparent. The fixtures were modern, a rainfall showerhead, a vessel sink, handles that turned with precision engineering rather than the loose wobble of aged plumbing. The toilet had one of those soft, close lids that descended with controlled slowness. But it was the smell that made my skin crawl. Under the bleach and new carpet odor was something else. Latex paint. Yes, but fresh, as if the walls had been painted hours ago. Yet when I touched them, they were bone dry. A digital clock on the nightstand glowed red, 2:17. I checked my phone. 12:23 a.m. The clock remained at 2:17. I unplugged it, watched the display die, then plugged it back in. It flashed 12 o'clock briefly, then snapped back to 2:17. That's when I noticed the first change. I'd set my bag on the chair by the window. I was certain of it, could still feel the weight leaving my shoulder as I dropped it there. But now it sat on the bed, unzipped, contents visible. My phone charger coiled on top instead of in the side pocket where I always kept it. I blinked, long and deliberate, and the lamp had moved. Not far, maybe 6 inches to the left on the nightstand, but I could see the dust-free circle where its base had been. Another blink. The lamp was back, but now its shade was tilted slightly. The room was watching me, adjusting itself with each moment my eyes closed. I sat on the bed, too firm, like sitting on compressed foam that had never known weight, and tried to rationalize. Highway hypnosis, micro-sleeps, the brain playing tricks after too much caffeine and too little rest. But when I rubbed my eyes and opened them, the mirror had shifted 3 inches up the wall. I could see the unpainted rectangle where it had hung before, the anchors still visible in the drywall. The remote control sat on the nightstand. Black plastic, generic, the kind that comes with every motel TV. I counted the buttons, 23 arranged in rows. Power, volume, channels, menu, input. I looked away, then back. 21 buttons. The volume controls had merged into a single rocker switch. As I watched, the remote seemed to shimmer, like heat distortion, and when it solidified, there were 19 buttons, the menu controls now gone entirely. I turned on the TV, a flat screen too modern for this place, and it showed only static. Not normal static, but patterns that almost resolved into shapes. Faces, maybe. Architecture. Rooms layered on rooms. An infinite regression of spaces that couldn't exist. Channel after channel. The same thing, except each time the patterns were different, suggesting different impossibilities. Then I saw the ceiling. In the exact center, a perfect rectangle of slightly discolored paint, maybe 3 feet by 2 feet. The edges were too precise to be water damage, too regular to be a patch job. Along the outline, barely visible unless you knew to look, were tiny holes at regular intervals. Screw holes, and at each corner, residue, adhesive residue, the kind left by heavy-duty mounting tape. Something had been attached there, something rectangular and substantial enough to need both screws and tape. Something that had been removed recently enough that the adhesive hadn't fully dried out. I could smell it faintly, that chemical tang of industrial glue. A camera mount. It had to be. I stood on the bed, reaching up. The ceiling was exactly 8 feet. I could touch it flat-palmed. The rectangle was centered perfectly over where someone lying in bed would be, where I would be, where others had been. That's when the paranoia truly set in. Not the creeping kind, but a sudden flood of certainty. I was being watched. Not might be, not could be, was. Right now. The sensation was physical, like heat on the back of my neck, pressure between my shoulder blades. Every surface in the room became suspect. The mirror that kept moving. Was there something behind it? The 2 bright bathroom lights. Were there cameras in the fixtures? The smoke detector with its steady green LED. Was that really just a smoke detector? I went to the window, pulled back those pristine curtains. The parking lot below was wrong. Not obviously, not impossibly, just wrong. My car was there but parked 3 spaces over from where I'd left it. The other 2 cars had switched places, or maybe they were different cars entirely. It was too dark to see colors clearly, and they were just shapes, could have been any make or model. But the real wrongness was the view itself. From the 2nd floor, I should have been able to see the highway, the desert stretching out, maybe distant lights from the next town. Instead, there was only parking lot, extending far beyond where it should have ended. Rows and rows of empty spaces under lights that didn't cast shadows the right way. And at the edges, where the light failed, something that might have been desert, or might have been nothing at all. A darkness that seemed solid, architectural. I let the curtain fall and turned back to the room. The chair had moved. The one I'd noted earlier, where my bag had or hadn't been. It now faced the bed directly, pulled out from the wall, positioned as if someone had been sitting there, watching me at the window. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Don't trust the mirrors. Then another. It's not recording anymore. And another. But it's still watching. I tried to reply, but my phone screen flickered, the text app closing itself. When I reopened it, the messages were gone. No record in my history, no unknown number in my contacts. But I remembered them, each word precise in my mind. The bathroom light turned on by itself, not flickering, not stuttering, just on, sudden and complete. In the mirror, I could see myself standing in the bedroom, phone in hand. But in the reflection, I was smiling. I wasn't smiling. My face was slack, confused, probably pale with exhaustion and growing fear. But my reflection smiled wider, showing too many teeth. I backed away from the bathroom door. The reflection didn't move with me. It stayed centered in the mirror, that horrible smile fixed, even as I pressed myself against the far wall. Only when I blinked did it reset, showing me where I actually stood. No smile, just my own frightened face. The digital clock still read 2:17. I checked my phone. 2:16 a.m. Somehow 3 hours had passed, or no time had passed and my phone was wrong, or time meant something different in room 17. I grabbed my bag, not caring any more about rest or the money I'd paid. But the door wouldn't open. The handle turned freely, the deadbolt slid back, but the door itself wouldn't budge. Not stuck, not locked. It felt like pushing against solid wall painted to look like a door. I pulled until my shoulders ached, threw my weight against it. Nothing. The window wouldn't open either. The latches moved, but the glass was fixed, possibly not even real glass, but something painted to look like transparency. The parking lot beyond had changed again. Now there were dozens of cars, all identical to mine, all parked in perfect rows. The room phone rang. I hadn't noticed a phone before, but there it was on the nightstand, black and rotary, absolutely wrong for this supposedly modern room. I didn't answer. It rang 17 times. I counted, then stopped, then immediately started again. On the 5th cycle, I picked up. Breathing, wet, labored breathing, like someone with fluid in their lungs. Then a voice, my voice but wrong, like a recording played at slightly the wrong speed. You're in my room. I hung up. The phone immediately rang again. This time I let it ring until it stopped. 17 times, always 17. The walls had started to sweat. Actual moisture beating on the paint, running down in thin rivulets that left no marks, pooling on carpet that didn't darken. The smell of latex grew stronger, mixed now with something organic, like milk just starting to turn. I sat on the bed because standing made me dizzy. The ceiling rectangle seemed larger now, or maybe I was smaller, or maybe the room was expanding around me. In my peripheral vision, shadows moved in the corners, but when I looked directly, there was nothing there. Just walls meeting at perfect right angles, impossibly perfect, like a 3D rendering rather than actual architecture. My phone died. Not battery drain. Dead. Black screen. No response to any button. Not even warm anymore. Like it had never been electronic at all. Just a piece of shaped glass and metal. The TV turned on by itself. No static this time. Instead, a view of room 17. My room. This room. But from above, from where the camera mount would have been. On the screen, I saw myself sitting on the bed looking at the TV. But in the footage, the room was different. Older. The walls were yellowed. The carpet stained. The bedspread a faded floral pattern from decades past. And on the bed, overlapping where I sat, translucent like double exposure, were others. A man in a business suit, methodically taking pills from a bottle. A woman in a wedding dress, sitting perfectly still for hours. A teenager drawing symbols on the walls with something dark, all in the same spot, all at different times, all at 2:17. The clock confirmed it. Still 2:17. I understood then, or thought I did. Room 17 wasn't a place but a when. A moment stretched thin, looping back on itself. Every 217 that had ever existed in this space, layered and compressed. The renovations weren't new. They were all times at once. The room as it had been, was, would be. The camera had watched them all, recording not for surveillance but for something else. Something that needed to observe the same moment from every angle of time. But understanding didn't help. The door still wouldn't open. The walls kept sweating. And in the TV, more figures appeared, translucent layers building up until the bed was just a writhing mass of bodies existing in the same space at different times. I could feel them. Cold spots and pressure, whispers in languages that predated the motel, would post-date it. Then I saw myself in the footage. Not now me, but future me, or past me, or alternate me. I was standing by the window, curtains pulled wide, writing something on the glass with my finger. The me on the bed, now me, stood up, moved to the window, pulled back the curtains. There were words on the glass, written in condensation from the inside. Check out before it loops. I turned back to the TV. The me in the footage was gone, but others remained. Endless others, all trying to leave room 17, all failing, all becoming part of 217. The door opened. Not dramatically, not suddenly. It just was open, had always been open, would always be open at this exact moment. I didn't run. That would have been wrong, would have broken something. I walked out slowly, deliberately, feeling the threshold pass under my feet like breaking through membrane. The hallway was normal, aged, stained, real. Room 17's door was closing behind me, and as it shut I saw that it was just wall again. Smooth stucco, no door, no window, no evidence it had ever existed. The numbers jumped from 15 to 16, as they should, as they always had except for when they hadn't. I stumbled down the stairs, through the lobby where the clerk didn't look up, out to my car which was exactly where I'd parked it. The dashboard clock read 2:18 a.m. as I started the engine. I drove without stopping until dawn, until the desert gave way to suburbs, until room 17 was hundreds of miles behind. But sometimes, in motel rooms and apartment bedrooms, in any space with 4 walls and a ceiling, I catch myself looking up, looking for rectangles of discolored paint, for evidence of cameras that watched, watch, will watch. And I check the time obsessively because I know with the certainty that comes from having been inside a moment that wouldn't end, that somewhere, in some room, it's always 217. The next morning, I called the Desert Vista Motel. The number I found online was disconnected. Google Maps showed empty desert where it should have been, but my credit card had been charged, and the receipt in my pocket was real. Though the ink was fading even as I looked at it, the numbers becoming illegible, the motel's name dissolving into nothing. Except for one detail that remained clear: room 17, $71, 27, timestamp 2:17 a.m. I've driven that stretch of US 93 6 times since then, looking for the Desert Vista. Sometimes it's there. I can see it from the highway, the flickering sign, the empty parking lot. But when I take the exit, it's gone. Or I can't find the exit. Or the exit leads somewhere else entirely. I've met 3 other people who've stayed in room 17. We found each other online, in forums for people who've experienced temporal anomalies, or reality slips. Their stories are different, but the same. The room is always 17. The time is always 2:17. The camera mount is always there, recently removed, and they all got out just as the loop was about to close, though none of us can explain what would have happened if we'd stayed. We compare notes sometimes. The woman in Portland says her room 17 was in a downtown high-rise hotel. The man in Miami found his in a beach resort. The teenager in Detroit was in a suburban Best Western. But the details match. The fresh paint, the moving furniture, the mirror that shows wrong things, the door that only opens when the moment allows. We've theories, of course. Government experiments, dimensional weak points, temporal surveillance, places where time got stuck, like a skipped record. But theories feel thin against the memory of those sweating walls, that watching emptiness, the certainty that room 17 exists everywhere and nowhere, always and never. I still travel for work. I still stay in motels, hotels, inns. But I always check. If they try to give me room 17, I ask for a different one. Most of the time, they look confused, check their system, tell me they don't have a room 17. They're lying, or they don't know, or room 17 doesn't exist for them. But sometimes, more often than random chance would suggest, they hand me a different key without question, and something passes behind their eyes. Recognition, maybe, or warning, or their own memory of 217 that never ended. Last week, in a hotel in Tulsa, the clerk said something as I turned away with my key to room 18. "Good choice," she said. "17's been having issues with the lighting." I asked what kind of issues. She looked at me for a long moment, then at the clock behind her. 2:16 a.m., then back at me. "The kind where things that have been removed are still there," she said, still watching. I stayed in room 18, but all night I heard something from the wall we shared with where room 17 should be. Not sound exactly, but pressure, like something vast trying to push through. And in the morning, there was a rectangle of condensation on my ceiling, exactly where a camera mount would be. The timestamp on the receipt for that stay, 2:17 a.m. It's always 2:17 a.m. somewhere. And somewhere, room 17 is waiting.